Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning, wherever you may be watching from, and welcome back to Beyond Belief with Nuria Khan. Today is a very important live stream, perhaps one of the most important live streams that I've done in a very long time, or arguably to date. But I think it's extremely important, no matter how much, thankfully, progress is being made on a governmental level and in general for, I guess, the level of public awareness given to the grooming or rape gang scandal, arguably the biggest cover up in British history. I think there is no end to how much we can talk about this. And literally, sunlight is the best disinfectant. And I think today, what we need to really, really shine a light on is what the British government for so long were too afraid to say. There have been just a handful of whistleblowers who I'm so grateful for, from everybody like Maggie Oliver to Tommy Robinson and countless others. It will just take me too long to name them all. But they have constantly tried to shine a spotlight on this horrific industrial scale of abuse long before the government was ready to accept that this was happening. They turned a blind eye for so long because the insanity in this country around DEI, whatever you want to call it, diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as this woke capture of being too afraid to be called racist, and so much so that you can't even record the ethnicities of perpetrators when they are severely overrepresented, is something that can never be forgiven. And so today, I am very excited. Well, not excited because it's a harrowing topic to discuss, but I'm very grateful that the one and only David Wood joins us, because David Wood has been shining a spotlight on the horrors of Islam and how it treats non-Muslims, minorities, women, and in general, how dark and dangerous this ideology is, probably since before any of us knew what YouTube even was. So before I bring David on, if people could just let me know, can you hear me okay in the chat? And I have got two fans on because it is insanely hot in the UK. We've had the hottest day ever recorded yesterday, and today is no different. So apologies if I'm sweating profusely throughout this conversation. And if my fans get too distracting or the window being open gets too distracting, do let me know. Right, so thank you, Hisham. The audio is fine. Okay, good to know. Right, without further ado, let's get stuck in. I'd like to welcome David Wood to Beyond Belief. Hi, David.
Hey, how's it going, Nuria?
Very well, thank you. How are you?
Oh, I'm good.
As I mentioned, David, I'm so grateful because I think you came to mind straight away when I was like, oh, who can I really do a deep dive and get into the crux of, some of the Islamic doctrinal issues when it comes to a topic as horrific as this. And I couldn't think of anybody better. So once again, very, very grateful that you're here. So just to give people some context of what's happened, I'm sure you're all aware that Rupert Lowe released his bombshell inquiry just a few days ago. And the reason I say bombshell is because and I have gone on to Talk TV and also said this, so this is not the first time I'm repeating this here, but the reason that it was so needed was because Rupert Lowe that report was the first one that makes the inextricable link between Islam and the abuse that these girls suffered. No other link, no other report, no other local inquiries, no other councils investigating themselves, police marking their own homework had ever made that link. The Casey report showed us that there were systemic failures across the board. And the J report before that showed us that there was systematic abuse happening in localized areas. So now, as time is ticking and we're progressing ever so slowly, we now realize that there were horrific crimes across local areas. Rupert Lowe's inquiry has a great map of it, which I'll pull up in a moment. Then we also know the scale of the cover-up and the failings across the board. I'm talking police, NHS staff, politicians, Whitehall institutions. All across the board, there were failures because of this capture that I mentioned. And now, finally, we've got the statutory national inquiry that has forced Labour's hand for them to enact across the country. So what happened yesterday was big news came out because the first countries that are going to be investigated thoroughly, the first localized areas that are going to be investigated thoroughly are Oldham, Keighley, Bradford, and London. Now, why is that important? Well, because Rotherham was the focal point of some of the major inquiries, and then local investigations were done elsewhere as well, up and down, mostly focused on the northern parts of England. Bradford was neglected over and over again, as was Keighley, even though it has an overwhelmingly large proportion of Pakistani Muslims who reside particularly in Keighley Central. I think they make up about 48% of the population there, if I'm not mistaken. But I think the government were too embarrassed to even start investigating the scale of abuse within Bradford because they didn't want it to turn into the next Rotherham. That's the level of horrors that we're about to uncover. Oldham has also been ignored since reports first came out in 2003. And when a Labour MP at the time, she tried to highlight this issue, she was shut down by the police themselves by saying that she would be deemed racist. And she got threats from other people in the community and was actually forced to step back. Now, arguably the most interesting addition to this national inquiry is London, because up until now, London's mayor, Sadiq Khan, has been like, oh, grooming gangs? What do you mean by grooming gang? What's a grooming gang? We don't have those here. Well, London is about to change the game because London will show that this is not confined to the north, but potentially this is a nationwide industrial scale operation that is also largely tied into drug trafficking networks, including trafficking these young girls across county lines. So you've got satellite states in and around London. For example, Luton is going to be investigated in a lot more detail. And Slough and other areas in London, just outside on the outskirts of London, where these girls could have been trafficked up and down the country. So there's some very, very welcome developments happening. And the fact that it's a statutory inquiry means that they've got the powers behind them to compel testimony, compel witnesses, and compel evidence. And the other thing that I'd like to shed a light on is that, look, this is the Labour Party conducting this inquiry, so I'm not going to hold my breath. And I said this yesterday on Talk TV as well. If you haven't watched that video, check it out. It's the latest video on my channel. I was on Peter Cardwell's show yesterday, and I just think nobody is going to go as far as Rupert Lowe's inquiry, which I'm going to discuss with David today, because it actually links Islamic doctrine. What I think the Labour Party will do is just say, oh, yes, we're going to get a lot more coverage around the ethnicities. And now we're going to see if there's any cultural factors. They haven't said religious yet, per se. But the one thing I do welcome is that they said they are going to talk to perpetrators as well. And they're going to try and gauge the mindset of the perpetrators and what their motivations were for this crime. And I think whatever evidence that brings forward, all the better. But I will not stop saying there is an Islamic underlying connection to this. And I said this again on Talk TV across Europe and internationally, as David will let us know. What is the common denominator between the majority of the perpetrators of these grooming gangs? They all follow Islam. What is the common denominator between all of their victims? They are all non-Muslims. So there is definitely a pattern there, and you'd be daft and very, very naive not to follow that line of inquiry. Right. Okay, that's my rant over. That's just an update with what's happening on the ground here in England. Statutory inquiry is on the way. Right, David. So thank you again for being here. When did you first learn about the scale of what was happening, or even hear the term grooming?
Yeah, not sure exactly. Maybe like, I don't know, 2009, 2010, 2011, somewhere in there. And it was a lot to do with Tommy Robinson reporting things. But yeah, that was before it was like in the mainstream media. And the only time you'd hear about it is, you know, this racist, Islamophobic, hate mongering bigot is saying this, which is interesting because the people, you know, the few people who were saying it back then, like what they were saying was going on is exactly what you see in the grooming gang report. It's the same thing. Anyway, that's the first time I heard about it, like as far as being this extremely widespread institutionalized system for, you know, grooming girls in various places and so on. I'd heard about rape gangs before that, going back to, I don't know, 2005, 2006, but it was in other countries, and it wasn't this like nationally organized system for it. It would just be I remember stories in Australia where, and it wasn't even Pakistanis then, it would be kind of different Muslim cliques, but that they'd lure a girl to a park and then they'd all gang rape her, and then they would eventually get caught and go to court, and they'd say things in court like, what do you mean she's a dirty girl, she's not a good girl? And like they had no concept of this being wrong. So there were stories in the news back then in places like Australia and Scandinavia, but yeah, it was the UK where you started hearing that it's just all over the place and it's a huge network.
Okay, and when did you, because you've understood and criticized Islam for a very long time, as I mentioned. You were probably one of the first people on this game and in YouTube, essentially. Did you make the Islamic connection pretty quickly based on what these perpetrators were saying in their court testimonials, as if like, well, what do you mean we don't have the right to do this? Did you think, wow, that they're getting that justification, almost the permission from their religion?
Yeah, I mean, at first when I was studying Islam, it was just because my best friend was a Muslim, and so I started reading the Muslim sources because we're discussing whether Islam is true, and you read about these things, taking female captives and sex slaves and things like that. You read about this in the Muslim sources, but you're thinking, okay, that's 14 centuries ago. The world has kind of moved on, and similarly with like, killing apostates and so on. All of a sudden, my friend eventually leaves Islam and becomes a Christian. I think, oh, cool, I'm done with Islam, because that was the only reason I was studying Islam. I was not interested in it at all. And it was about a month later, he gets his first death threat, and it was attached to his car. And it was, he has to die because he left Islam. I was like, wait a minute, this is still like, this is the United States. There are people who still think like this in the United States. And then kind of, over time, you find out, hey, just because you have nice Muslim friends doesn't mean there aren't plenty of people out there who start taking these things very seriously. But, you instantly start noticing the connections between what Islam teaches and what's going on. And I mean, at the end of the day, it's in Islam, in the Quran, in the Hadith, you can conquer someone, and if you conquer someone, then you take their wives and daughters as your sex slaves. Doesn't even matter if you capture the women with their husbands. Their marriages are automatically dissolved once you capture them, and they become your sex slaves. And that's different from now. Muslims didn't go out and march an army into the UK and conquer the UK. And that's one of the responses you get from Muslims, like, oh, no. That was back when we would conquer them. Well, yeah, because you had to back then. People would have protected their wives and daughters. You would have to fight and subjugate and kill them in order to take their wives and daughters, because they weren't just going to let you have their wives and daughters. What happened more recently in our times is there are easier ways to conquer people apparently now, especially if you can't march an army out. You can conquer the UK apparently with words. Just make people really nervous about being called racists or Islamophobes, and you can conquer them that way. And so why not, the idea, like, why not just skip to the end where we take your wives and daughters? But yeah, you have all sorts of Islamic ideas about the superiority of Muslims and the inferiority of non-Muslims, taking sex slaves, no minimum age for these kinds of things. You have all these ideas, and this is just a 21st century, well, I guess 20th century started manifestation of a bunch of these teachings that rise to the surface when Islam is interacting in non-Muslim areas.
Yeah, so I'm really glad that, once I wish these things were confined to the 7th century as well. And being a former Muslim myself, it's only when I realized, like, having like, well, even when I thought about, oh, can I leave Islam? even just on a very small, like, familial level, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't even tell anybody, because I didn't even think you could leave this religion, let alone the bounty on your head then once you do leave it. And then all the things that you think, okay, well, if you read Islamic history, you think, well, every empire had, you know, crazy shenanigans going on. They were looting, pillaging, raping, taking concubines, having harems, all that kind of thing was, you know, you find it in Chinese empires, you find them in empires all around the world. You see armies going into war and committing large-scale sexual violence, and you see war as a weapon, you see rape as a weapon of war. What's crazy is to think that because Islam, and I love that Christopher Hitchens says, because it makes such grand claims for itself, and the fact that it claims to be the last, final, perfected word of God that is timeless and eternal, meaning you can't change something that's immutable, because if you do, you are changing the source material, which is the word of God, transmitted directly to Muhammad via Gabriel, i.e. in the Quran. And therefore, all of this, the things that you were mentioning, the lack of a lower age limit for marriage, the fact that it talks about waiting periods for divorced prepubescent girls, means that that will be enshrined within the Islamic doctrine for time immemorial, because how dare you change it? Like, no reformer can come and say, well, Allah should have realized that was for that time, we don't do that anymore. And I think you are absolutely right that when you confront Islam, or when you have some kind of run-in with Islam, you realize that all of those things that other religions have maybe worked past now, or they just don't apply because we've moved on, even from a morality perspective, with Islam, those things that you cannot even consider, your human mind can't think that this is morally even something we need to discuss. Like the conversation we're having today, I can't believe we're having to discuss it in 2026. And that's why I do want to steer clear today of kind of not fixating on too much of the victim survivor testimony, because it is honestly too harrowing. I think I'm like a third of the way through the report, and I need to keep taking breaks because the testimonies are genuinely too hard to stomach. But just a little disclaimer that if you are a victim survivor of group-based or gang-based child sexual exploitation, please be mindful that some of the topics that do come up when we're discussing Islam, because Islam is that dark of an ideology, they may be triggering. So just a warning, if you are a victim survivor, we are going to be discussing Islamic doctrines which enable some very horrific things that you know, might bring back some triggering memories. So please just be mindful of that moving forward. So David, okay, so let's pull up the inquiry, and I want to share this with you. And so I'm not sure if, let me move it to a new window. Can you see my screen?
Yep. There you go.
Okay, perfect.
When you enlarged it like that, it's kind of cut off.
Oh, okay.
Part of it's cut off. It was okay in the.
Okay, hold on. Is that better?
There you go.
Okay, perfect. So I'm not sure how many people are aware, but I actually was very grateful that Rupert Lowe and Sammy Woodhouse actually called me to give expert testimony to the rape gang inquiry. And I was extremely honored that I would not miss this opportunity to, as a former Muslim, coming from a British Pakistani experience, I think I was not going to waste that opportunity to link how tribalistic some parts of Pakistani culture are, and also the way that they hold on to Islam. That connection is almost like just a crazy, deadly combination. And I really, really wanted to make sure that I gave my angle on why I think Islam was a motivating factor for these men in what they were doing. So very grateful that will be on the parliamentary record forever, because I wanted to show that all the people that came before me, because I stand on the shoulder of giants, just because they were non-Muslim and they were saying things did not make them bigoted and racist. And I was like, well, here you are. I'm a girl of Pakistani heritage and I've left Islam, and I will tell you the exact same thing. Try calling me a white supremacist or a racist or a bigot. Good luck with that. So let's get into it straight away, because I think, David, I'm sure you know as well, right? Have you read this report yet, or the inquiry, even like just briefly skimmed it?
I read all the introductory stuff. I read a bunch of the stories, and then I skipped to the influence of Islam section.
Okay,
So, yeah.
perfect. So you actually know this section more than me, because I actually haven't got to this part entirely yet. I just kind of skimmed through the main topics because myself, Connor Tomlinson, Ayan Hirsi Ali, a bunch of other people did give their contributions to the Islam part. So I was really intrigued to see
Yeah,
what
we
doctrines.
we couldn't tell who they were talking to, but we could tell they were talking to some well-informed people. Just reading through this section, you could tell. I mean, they're quoting all the relevant passages and stuff like that, and all the relevant doctrines. So, yeah.
Oh, good, good, good. Exactly. That's what I thought. And I mean, um, this is so kind of like David, I don't know how to explain it to you, but like imagine being a British MP who has always strived away from bringing Islam into the mix, or thinking that even like critiquing Islam, because we're such a politically correct country and we've swung so much the other way. And then imagine seeing from whatever page this starts on onwards, and Rupert Lowe's out here being like, this is in Islam, this is what they were doing. This would have been like shocking to the average British person who was like, oh, Islam is a religion of peace. And, I know a really good Muslim neighbor that I have, that they're harmless people. Sure, they may be harmless, but it doesn't mean you need to remain uneducated about the doctrine itself. So I'll quickly just introduce this, and then let's start discussing what we think were the main aspects here. If you haven't read the inquiry, just know that some of the main things, the recurring themes that came up, were the use of the word white when referring to these girls, the use of the word pigs, and the use of the word dogs. And I'm gonna ask David's opinion on that as well, because I think pigs and dogs are very relevant to Islam. I know a lot of extremist Muslims in England call the British police dogs as well. It's like and pigs, because obviously how much Islam hates both of those, and they've applied the same thing to the girls in this case. So it starts off with the Muslim treatment of non-Muslims worldwide. And it says, across Britain, we have noted girls from Sikh and Hindu backgrounds have also been targeted by Muslim gangs. Unlike the white British majority, these non-Muslim immigrant populations were never prevented from organizing as a collective to prevent their own. In doing so, as was their duty, the network of Sikh organizations drew attention to the appalling treatment of non-Muslims in Pakistan. So David, do you know about the Sikh diaspora here? They essentially had their own patrols that they would go, because they know the mindset of like Pakistani perpetrators more than anything, from their history as well, and because they come from a similar area geographically, they know how this mindset works.
Yeah, and it was what, 5 or 6 years ago that there was a big there were lots of stories about this happening with the Sikh community, and it's because that's also like an honor shame culture. And so the plan for Sikh girls was for some attractive young Muslim to seduce a Sikh girl, and once you did, you took video or pictures, and then it became, now we own you. Basically, you have to do what we want, or we'll post this on the internet and we'll send this to your family. And so the girls, they basically were so terrified of dishonoring their families that they would then become basically like prostitutes for the Muslims. And the Sikh community eventually had to get together and say, we basically need to change. We need to let our daughters know that if they ever fall for anything like this or ever make a mistake, you can come to your family and tell them, so that they're not terrified. And because you'd rather your daughter do something and then tell you, and not be forced into becoming a prostitute or a sex slave for Muslims. You'd much rather have that happen than they spend the next several years as the sexual property of Muslims. So yeah, they had to kind of start their own like patrol system to keep an eye on things, but also they had to let girls know, hey, if you ever do something and you're ashamed, you need just come to your family, come to your family. you know, they'll try to understand, but it's better that way than what's going on now. So yeah, they had to make some changes and so on. And guess what? Now you don't hear about it as much. So they actually took steps and fixed things.
Exactly, and I think that went a long way to. I mean, don't get me wrong. There were a lot of Sikh girls and Hindu girls that did fall through the cracks, and they weren't protected by the patrolling, like community forces. Essentially, they'd like made themselves their kind of standalone force. But it did go a long way into kind of putting Muslims off for targeting them on the same scale that they were able to target the white girls. Because as you see through the testimonies and the failings, some of these white English girls, and like, even however extensive the grooming networks go, they were sometimes even dropped right back to their perpetrator or dropped right back to the location where the rape had happened. And therefore, they weren't even able to collect the right evidence in time, or the police are literally like, back to your abuser, here you go, she's a prostitute anyway. I mean, I don't know how you can be a child and a prostitute, which is, again, very important that this new statutory inquiry is going to overturn any conviction that was given to any victim survivor of the grooming gangs who was convicted back then of being a child prostitute. It's a little too late, but thank goodness it's happening now. So just to set some context of what David was explaining, the fact that they've even had to mention what happens in Pakistan is, again, just to get some insight into the mentality of Pakistani men when it comes to non-Muslim girls, even back in Pakistan, right? So there's so many stories where, many people, like I've covered them in the past, plenty of other Pakistani ex-Muslims do as well, that there are forced marriages or forced abductions of Christian girls, of Hindu girls in Pakistan, and they are literally taken by some old man, usually old enough to be their granddad, taken as a wife, that she's forced to say the shahada, basically the magic Arabic spell you say to become a Muslim, and the number of forced conversions the government turns a blind eye to. So this is very normalized in a country like this. And when we're talking about the representation from the Pakistani community in Britain, we're talking about migration from one of the most regressive areas of Pakistan called Mirpur, which I'm not trying to be disparaging here, but even if you come from a different part of Pakistan, for example, I come from Lahore, my grandma would tell me that the behavior of people from Mirpur is just beyond the pale. They're considered to be like extremely tribal, extremely regressive, extremely patriarchal, extremely conservative, and they refuse to modernize. So this is the level of the mentality of the men that we're dealing with here.
Oh, right. So by the way,
yes,
I
go
mean,
on.
By the way, it's this is not something that's not known about Pakistan. This is pretty common knowledge for anyone who pays attention to what's going on in Pakistan. But I mean, notice the situation. You have lots of men in Pakistan who believe that it's perfectly acceptable to just go take a Christian girl or a Sikh girl or a Hindu girl and take her back to your house, torture her, beat her until she signs a document saying, I'm a Muslim now. And the Christian or Sikh or Hindu girl's family can't really do anything about it. They go to police, and police are either complicit and they're always going to side with the Muslims, or they're scared of the Muslims too. In other words, if you had a nice, honest police officer, if he sides with the Christians or the Hindus or the Sikhs against the Muslims, he's a target too. And so you end up with police completely incapable of doing anything about what's going on. And in addition to that, if anyone still tries to press charges, if the family tries to push this, you'll get violence against the entire family or violence against their entire religious community from mobs of Pakistanis, which means that the Pakistani Muslims don't just like blame the guy who went out and kidnapped the girl. They'll blame you for having a problem with it, and you'll be the problem. You're the problem if you have a problem with what they're doing. They'll come after you. And so this is not something that governments can't possibly know about Pakistan. And yet, what do? Hey, let's bring in tons of these guys and just hope that we get all the good ones who don't do that. Well, unless you have some system for weeding out the people who think like that, you're obviously going to get a bunch of these guys in there as well. But I mean, think about what you have back there. It's you pressure or threaten or whatever it takes until police themselves and government officials are terrified of doing anything in response. Guess what? You got the same thing in the UK. They get angry when someone exposes what's going on. They don't get angry at the people who are actually doing all this stuff. Guess what? You got the same thing in the UK now. All the same problems. I mean, it's a little different because now you have a minority population, but you end up with the exact same scenarios and the exact same problems. And it's like, how did you think all these people were just going to magically transform into westernized people who think completely differently from the way they were raised in Pakistan, or from the way their culture has influenced them to think? It's like it's extremely sloppy and disturbing thinking, but it's a recurring pattern. I mean, you'll take similar things with like honor killings and stuff. You'll take people from a country where honor killings are fairly common, and you'll bring them to a European nation, and then, oh, we're shocked that there's been an honor killing. How could this happen? Well, what did you do to change that family's thinking about these things?
And David, this is one of the biggest flaws of the multiculturalism project, if you will, because the thinking is like, the very naive Western, extremely kind of progressive mindset is that, oh, you're just a slightly different skin color shade and you speak with an accent, but really our humanity and our morals are all interchangeable. Well, I'm sorry, it's absolutely not. If you're, as David was saying, if you're bringing in people, large swathes of people from these regressive areas, I mean, just look at the rape statistics that have skyrocketed in London because of this flood of mass migration from countries where what is their excuse constantly given to the judges is that, oh, in my culture this isn't wrong, or I didn't know that you're not supposed to do this. I mean this is the level that we're dealing with here. The men are literally walking around our streets thinking if a woman is, if she's not all covered from head to toe, or even if she's sitting with her legs not closed, that means she's asking for it. People don't just forget and drop all of their inherited over generations worth of beliefs as soon as they cross the channel. They doesn't magically disappear. They don't magically become European or westernized. And it's exactly the same thing with honor culture, or dishonor culture, as I like to call it. As David mentioned, it's the same thing with female genital mutilation. It's the same thing with forced marriages. It's the same thing with cousin marriages. And it's the same thing with these grooming gangs, because these are aspects, and I work in the sector of preventing violence against women and girls. And the amount of resources that go to problems, which I'm sorry to say, are not European or Western imports of problems. They're not native problems. They are problems that are actual imports from sub-Saharan Africa, from South Asia, from the Middle East, from all over other parts of the world where their culture has not caught up to the morality of the West. And it's a massive problem. So David's absolutely right. And I think that's where we've gone severely wrong. Not just England, I'll apply this as well to all the Anglosphere. It's very naive of you to think that you can flood your country with people from various cultures because you may see them as exotic and you may hold the bigotry of low expectations, but they can never just acclimatize to your society. This is what you will get. You will get large-scale abuse like this if you do. And I just want to pull up this point because I did mention it as well in my testimony in this inquiry, because I thought it was relevant to bring up. But is it Kim? Yeah, Kim Thomas, thank you for bringing this point up as well, that the Pakistani army did this to 250,000 Bangladeshi girls and women during the Bangladeshi Liberation War in 1971. They used mass-scale rape because, once again, the Hindu women and girls were considered dirty and inferior and infidels, and they essentially wanted to wipe out the genetics of that inferior non-Muslim population and breed more Muslims via those women, not to mention all the normal reasons that they do it, to degrade and humiliate the enemy, as is done usually when rape is used as an element of sexual warfare. So yes, thank you for bringing that up.
And by the
yes.
way, I just wanted to point out that it's not just it's not just like the grooming gang victims and others who suffer because of this really, really stupid idea that's just way too widespread in Western nations, that basically all people everywhere are pretty much the same and have the same values and generally the same morals and ideas and so on. It's people all over the place suffer because of stupid decisions that are made based on that really just completely false and ridiculous idea. And so you take various nation building projects. I'm not sure. I'm guessing things are similar in the UK, but here in the US, we're just told, we're told all our lives, hey, you have the occasional Muslim radical terrorists and stuff, but 99.99% are just peaceful people who just want to live normal lives, and they love freedom and democracy. And that led to the question, well, why do you have so many problems in these countries? And the answer that we were repeatedly given was, they just have bad leaders. They have evil leaders like Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi and Assad. They have these bad, evil leaders. And so it really sucks, because it was built into our mindset, because this is how the US started. Hey, if you got problems with another country, and you have a bunch of people who want freedom and democracy, and it's a tyrant who's stopping you, just get rid of the tyrant. Get rid of the tyrant, and then freedom and democracy can flourish. And so we have that same mindset with places like Iraq. What's the problem with Iraq? Well, Saddam Hussein. Other than that, you've got people just want freedom and democracy. What about Syria? What's the problem? Well, the problem was Assad. Other than that, people just want freedom and democracy. Same as Libya. And so we have that mindset. We'll just help people get rid of the dictator or the tyrant, and then freedom and democracy will flourish. And so we go over and we get rid of Saddam, and we try to put a little government in there, and what happens? You eventually get ISIS, and we can't figure out what happened there. What happened?
What do you mean it's not a perfectly utopian society, David? What happened?
Yeah, weird stuff. And they don't realize, if they actually understood things, they'd understand, okay, you had Shias who wanted to kill Sunnis, and you had Sunnis who wanted to kill Shias, and you had people who wanted to kill Christians and impose jizya and so on. You just had this terrifying dictator that everyone was scared of, and everyone knew, okay, you start crossing lines, this guy's going to bring tanks into your town, and it's going to be a bloodbath. So they were all scared of this guy, and you say, okay, let's get rid of the scary guy, because we don't like him. He's an evil dictator. We don't like that guy. Get rid of him. And then, wait, why are they blowing up each other's mosques right now? What's going on? What just happened? Oh yeah, they wanted to. There were people there who wanted to. They were just more scared of that guy. And then, and it's very easy for things to escalate after that, because imagine a scenario where you only had like 1% of Shias who wanted to, blow up Sunni mosques or fight Sunnis or something, or just 1% of Sunnis who wanted to attack Shias. Then you get rid of the guy that everyone's scared of, and someone does it. Someone goes and attacks another person's mosque. Well, all of a sudden, that 1% of Sunnis who wanted to attack Shias now goes up to 10%, because they had just attacked our mosque. So now you have more people who want to, and then these things escalate really quickly, because there's no one who's going to some of those guys, they don't respond to anything other than being completely brutal with them. That's the only thing they understand. Other than that, they just want to fight. And then all of a sudden, give it a couple of years and you get something like ISIS. And then tons of people. Just think about all the people who suffered, the Yazidis and stuff like that, who suffered because stupid ideas that people learn in college when they're studying politics in college, and then all of a sudden they become politicians with actual power, and they put these ideas into practice in the world. And it's not them who suffer. They're living comfortable lives in the United States. It's other people who have to suffer because of their stupid decisions.
No, exactly, and that's a very good point. It's such a fallacy to think that Islam would just be able to flourish if it was just left alone and then the leader was disposed and peaceful Muslims took over. It's never the case. I mean, Islam as a doctrine is enough to all the sects will fight amongst each other. I think even whether you believe Muhammad existed or not, like the whole point is, even he said, Islam started as something strange and it will end as something strange. And even he gives the indication that there's one sect really that's going to make it to heaven out of 72 or something like that. So even if there was not corrupt leaders and they weren't authoritarian to some degree, which David is right, they actually kind of need to be in order to keep Islam in check in those countries, because otherwise it would be just brutal beyond measure. And you get the Yazidis who suffer, you get the Kurds who suffer. To be honest, you get any minority, the minority that's the weakest at that moment will suffer at the hands of them. So look at the Gulf countries. They know how to keep extremism in check. In fact, they look at the West and they're mocking us now. There's videos of the UAE ambassadors and other senior members of government saying the West is importing more radicals than we would ever tolerate. In fact, they're too scared to send their children here for university because they fear they'd get radicalized on UK university campuses. Can you imagine that? Like, this is what we're dealing with. But I also just wanted to quickly say that, Hisham, you make a good point about the UK. And you might be right in terms of Canada and US as well. We can ask David. But Hisham says the difference is that the UK basically imported Pakistani villagers, while Canada and America imported more city-educated Pakistanis. So what happened in the English experience, as far as I'm aware, is that there was this dam called the Mangla Dam, which was built in Mirpur around the 1960s. And it basically wiped out like 20 odd villages or something, and just floods of people then in tandem with like the British Nationality Act and all this kind of loosening of how to get citizenship was going on, and they just flooded the UK. So much so that now members of parliament have the audacity to stand up and try and ask for an airport to be built in Mirpur to have direct connections with England. Like, this is how Mirpur focused the Pakistani cohort is in some parts of the UK. So I do agree with that. I think like it is offset in other parts of a lot of these Mirpuri settled in the northern towns of England, where you get these enclaves like Rochdale, Bradford, Telford, places like that. In the city, you don't see, in London, you don't see them as congregated as much. And thankfully, there's enough of the more educated Pakistanis, I would say. But David, I'm not sure if you can comment on the American. Do you know what kind of Pakistanis have migrated to America by and large, or?
I would guess it's a mix, but
Okay.
it wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me if this is correct.
Yeah, well, especially for the UK, it definitely is. Okay, so let's start with the Muslim supremacy or Islamic supremacism, because I think that's just the overarching theme in this as well. So it reads that Islam holds that those who are righteous and truly fear God, meaning Muslims, are inherently superior to those who reject God's commands, namely non-Muslim. This idea is captured in Quran 3:110. You Muslims are the best nation raised up for humankind, commanding what is good and forbidding what is wrong. Now, that is a very important concept that we're going to just unpack further in this. So remember this. And believing in Allah. If only the people of the book, i.e. Christians, like the lovely David here, and Jews believed, it would be better for them. Some among them are believers, but most are perverted. So David, can you let us know, are you perverted?
Well, most of us are. So, just statistically, I would probably be. And it's this, this is kind of the other side of the coin from Surah 98, verse 6, which calls Jews, Christians, and al-mushrikun, so that's anyone who associates a partner with Allah, but calls Jews, Christians, and al-mushrikun the worst of creatures. So Muslims are the best of peoples, or the best nation ever raised up for mankind, and non-Muslims are the worst of creatures. And that's something that that you could see over and over again in the victim stories that the Muslim some of the Muslim groomers would make the girls lick their feet clean and so on as they're being raped and so on, and it was all because you are an inferior, disgusting person. If you're the worst of creatures, you're lower than a dog. You're lower than a dog. You're lower than an insect to us. And yeah, this see, it would be, it's better for them if they become Muslims. And that's another element that rises, that you see over and over again rising to the surface in the victim stories, that we're actually trying to help you by treating you like this. We're the good guys for treating you like this, because by treating unbelievers as they should be treated, namely as inferior beings, will, over time, they'll eventually realize that it's better to be a Muslim.
Yeah, you're absolutely right in that, because I mean, just beyond going to commanding what's good and forbidding what's wrong, as you can see here, this responsibility can be understood as authorizing Muslims to correct, which we'd hear over and over again in victim survivors' testimony, that these girls were being corrected for having looser morals than Muslim women, or drinking alcohol and being out on the streets, being free to be themselves. They would need to they're correcting their behavior by punishing them through the sexual violence that they would enact, and compel, or if needed, to punish non-Muslims. So a lot of the time, this abuse is sexual violence followed by beatings, followed by torture, because they are punishing them for being who they are, and then they're trying to correct their behavior by beating them and invoking their God to do it. Some of them, and I hate to quote these things, but in one of the testimonies, a victim survivor mentioned that he would say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, so actually invoking in the name of God, the most beneficial, the most merciful, before he started to rape her, as if he was doing a godly duty, like, basically enjoining his Muslim duty by what he was about to do to her. And also the fact that Muslims are deemed to be superior than non-Muslims, we actually hear the Muslim perpetrators taunting these girls by saying, well, your God's forsaken you, where's your God now? Your God can't protect you, in the middle of them being abused by the Muslims, therefore trying to say, like, you believe in a weaker God that can't do anything, and our God has told us to come and correct you because of the way that you live your life in a dirty infidel manner. And David is right. That's why in some cases, especially when the girls were accidentally, or who knows, even some cases consciously impregnated by the perpetrators, to legitimize the pregnancy for some of the perpetrators, they would marry the girl and they would convert her to Islam to make the marriage legitimate in their eyes. But then you'd hear testimonies of them being forced to walk 5 meters behind the man, and then they would be subjected to beatings, because remember, in the Quran, you can beat your Muslim wife as well. That's essentially what the prescription is. If you fear disobedience from her, the last resort is to beat her. So they would beat them anyway, because they were kafirs and they needed to be punished and corrected. But then even the ones that they would forcibly convert, they wouldn't let them even look out the windows of their houses. They'd make them cover from head to toe. They'd make them walk 5 steps behind them when they would go to the medical clinic for appointments, and they would beat them black and blue every day because they were disobedient. David, any comments on that, or should we move forward?
No, I'm looking at 4828 right now.
Is that here? Am I looking at it?
Right,
Yeah.
right
okay.
there,
You want to read it for us and give your thoughts?
Yeah, 4829, the very next verse, is also connected to all of this. But you have here 4828. It is He, Allah, who has sent His messenger with the guidance and the religion of truth, Islam, to make it triumph over every religion. So a couple things here. It's Allah has sent Muhammad with the guidance and the religion of truth. And so it's thanks to Muhammad that this is going to triumph over every religion. The very next verse, Surah 48, verse 29, says, Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, and those who are with him are severe against disbelievers, merciful among themselves. So you see how Islam is going to triumph over every religion by being severe against people who aren't Muslims, and only showing mercy, only being merciful towards fellow Muslims. And just think about the connection there. We're brutalizing these girls. We're severe against these disbelievers, and we're only merciful towards each other. And this is all part of making Islam triumph over every religion. It's basically the general gist of all the stories.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why it's very important when the victim survivors themselves are mentioning that in between the abuse, they're picking up on this religious language that is invoked by the perpetrators. Who are we to miss that out of our investigations? Or how are we going to miss that in terms of connecting the dots as to what is riling these Muslim men up? If they're constantly saying things like this, they're constantly invoking their God, they're constantly saying why they are doing what they're doing to these white girls. And there's even testimonies where one of the girls is saying that at times there would be Muslim girls in the car with her and they would be treated so differently. It's kind of what David was alluding to just then. There was a clear distinction in how they would treat Muslim girls. And look, I'm not saying that there was absolutely no girl that came from a Muslim background that was not caught up in this. There definitely a handful of Muslim girls, but again, the situation there wasn't so religiously connected, and they were just vulnerable Muslim girls that were exploited and taken advantage of. But this gang-based sexual exploitation on white girls particularly is why this inquiry was so important, because you can talk about child sexual exploitation in general, which is what the first inquiry was about to do, where victim survivors quit because they said, you're broadening the scope of this so much that we're losing the focus on the fact that there was an Islamic motivation, and most of my perpetrators, or the majority of them, were so overrepresented and Muslim. So yeah, there's a superiority, and then there's the classic line that David was mentioning as well, that surely the worst of animals, or the worst of creatures, depending on which translation you read, in Allah's sights are rejectors of Islam, as they do not believe. Okay, so if you, in your mind, if your God is telling you that somebody is the worst of creatures, I think elsewhere in the Quran, David, you can also point me in the right direction, but the Quran also says that Allah turned Jews into pigs and something at one point. So this concept of dogs and pigs and unclean and dirty comes up over and over again when talking about or referring to non-believers. And then once again, in the testimonies, the girls would say that they were compared to and called dogs and pigs. And I've heard extremists from some of their material online, always when they're planning to carry out an attack, their code word for the British police are the pigs, and they use that when they're about to go and attack. So again, disclaimer, a horrifying thing I'm also going to mention, but they've also, when they involved animals within this rape, they would make these girls be raped by dogs in some cases and mock that act happening. So it is highly disturbing. But once again, the thematic link is there. David, anything?
Yeah. Oh yeah, I mean, I don't remember which year it was, maybe 2011 or 2012, but I made a video a long time ago called "Sacrificing Our Daughters," and the reason for calling it "Sacrificing Our Daughters" was I tied it into old school paganism from back in the day when they still had child sacrifice, and that your devotion to your deity is kind of determined by the value of your sacrifice. So people kind of got the idea that the greatest offering you could make would be your own daughter or something like that, because that shows just how absolutely dedicated you are. And here we are in the 21st century, and what is it? It's, hey, to show how dedicated we are to, sacrificing on this altar of tolerance, we'll even offer up, the kids of the nation and so on to show our allegiance. So that's why I called it sacrificing our daughters. But I also talked about what I think the psychology is in all of this, like the rage that you see with lots of the perpetrators. Okay, if you're using the girls for sex, that's evil. But when you bring in a dog to rape, okay, there you're just trying to degrade them. You're not even trying to get just sex out of the girl. You're deliberately trying to just show your utter contempt for these girls. And I think like psychologically, you've got passages like these. Muslims are the best of peoples ever raised up for mankind. Non-Muslims are the worst of creatures. They're lower than dogs. They're lower than insects. And your religion teaches that. And yet you look around at the world and it's the non-Muslim nations that are the most powerful and most advanced and best educated and so on. And so you look at your own nations and what's going on here? What's going on? And it seems like that's the sort of thing that would just fill people with resentment looking around. This is not the way the world is supposed to be. The world is supposed to be Muslims on top because we've got the final revelation and we've got the final prophet and we've got these promises from God and we're going to take over the world and this is the way things are supposed to be. And you're looking around going, everyone's more powerful than us. Everyone's more advanced than us. This is not the way things are supposed to be. All of a sudden you get some of these guys who have all this pent up resentment that the world is not the way it's supposed to be, with them on top and everyone else on bottom, and they get control over an 11-year-old girl. And it's like, we're going to show you, we're going to show, like, all this resentment and rage comes out and they take it out on the girls to treat them, to kind of put the world right a little bit. Like, finally, we're on top, we're completely in control. And these non-Muslims are finally in their place, and we get to finally make them feel it. I think that's what's going on kind of psychologically with the rage and the having dogs rape the girls and things.
Well, and also Hisham says it's ironic considering that dogs are haram in Islam. I actually think that's the point. I think they've used them deliberately because how dogs are considered dirty and unclean apart from guard dogs in Islam, that they're using something they already view as so dirty, and then they're forcing that act, and then they're watching a girl at the mercy of that. Do you know what I'm saying, David? Like, it's almost like a double humiliation, degradation ritual by making the thing that they view as the worst thing possible and having that do what it's doing to the girl.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think that the irony has a place there. We'll get to it further down because some of these, as you'll notice, some of these Islamic concepts will overlap. So obviously the superiority of Muslims, when you think of how they describe non-Muslims, not just the worst of creatures, but generally words like kafir and infidel, non-believers, they're said as pejoratives. It's not just as like, oh, somebody who believes different to me. It's actually a pejorative. They say that to us ex-Muslims all the time if you've left the faith. The way they talk to you as an apostate is also a pejorative. They'll say it to you as if I am also now part of this dirty, unclean cohort of people because I was once given the perfected truth and I've walked away from it. So yeah, more than likely all of this stuff applies to apostates as well. But I'm trying to focus on the fact that it is said in a very aggressive, pejorative manner, not just like, oh, this is us and that's the other. The other is very much unclean and your enemy and beneath you, especially with Christians and Jews, because they were given the scripture and then apparently, according to Islam, they corrupted it. So there's even more kind of contempt for them. And then obviously the contempt for polytheistic religions, because in Islam, shirk is considered the biggest sin ever, associating partners with Allah. And that's what they believe that Hindus and, pagans and other religions do anyway. So this is what David was saying. It's absolutely awful, but this is how this manifests itself. So I will read it out. So please brace yourselves. In her July 2020 podcast interview, Rotherham survivor Dr. Ella Hill described abusive language and acts that embodied the sense of superiority. She recounted being made to bend down and kiss her perpetrator's feet as a deliberate act to underscore her inferiority. She also spoke of another Rotherham victim who, during gang rapes by dozens of men, was forced to lick their feet clean because they believed they were morally superior to her. It's a Muslim superiority thing, she says. They believe they have maximum moral authority to command the people beneath them to lick their feet. She further noted that her rapists viewed non-Muslim habits as inherently impure. If you're eating pork, you're unclean, you're dirty. If you use a knife and fork, you're dirty. If you don't eat your food with your hands. So yeah, this is how it manifests in the real world. And I'll tell you what, this is so pathetic. Coming from a Muslim background, no joke when I say this, Muslim cultures, whether it's in Dubai, Saudi, Pakistan, wherever you go, they actually think they're superior to the West. And I'm sorry it's such a trivial matter, but because they use water to clean their bottoms after they go to the bathroom, they think that they have one up on the West massively. You know, forget all the inventions of the West that they're consuming all day and everything the West has created, from the steam engine to the aeroplanes. They're like, oh, they use toilet paper. They actually call them like dirty. They follow it up with swear words, which I don't want to say. But this is a taunt. If you go to the Muslim part of the world, when people land there, they're like, oh, back to civilization. You know, they have, they actually called Muslim showers. You get the little shower sprays that are next to the toilets in the majority of the Muslim world, or you get like one of those, in the poorer countries, you just have like it's like a little tub type thing that you use. But essentially the Muslim shower they think is like some revelation, and white people in general, they actually say white people are so unclean because they don't do that. Little things like that. So even if they see pork, if you see the way that a Muslim, you know, is probably gambling, out drinking, clubbing, on cocaine, but then you offer them a ham sandwich and they suddenly like freak out and be like, oh my God, ham, pork, get that away from me. And it's like, that's where you draw the line. You've got hookers, you got cocaine, you're in a club, you're gambling, but ham makes you react like this. Okay, got it. So I completely understand here where she's coming from. This is genuinely the little idiosyncrasies that Muslims have with their superiority, because they think that their Sirat al-Mustaqim, which is the right path, is like some pure, very kind of morally superior path that just the white culture doesn't have.
No, I mean, just the insanity, the moral insanity here is just glaring. I mean, think about this. These are gang rapists who groom, drug, rape, gang rape, and pimp girls who are 11 years old, and then torment them and have them raped by dogs. And these guys think they're morally superior to everyone else. It's like what has your religion done to you? What has your religion done to your brain when you think like that?
Exactly. Absolutely polluted it with it's very difficult for a human to conceive this level of disgust and hate that you can have for a fellow human. And I'm surprised the way that Islam, you have to give it props as an ideology, the way that it's enshrined hate is next to none. I'll tell you that, because even just leaving Islam, I was like, oh, I don't have to hate all these people that I think I'm supposed to hate. That, you know, Allah tells me to don't befriend Jews, don't befriend Christians, hate the gays. Like it was hard being a Muslim. You carry so much hatred around you, and you have to believe these stupid things that I was telling you. The way that a Muslim thinks, I held all these beliefs once upon a time. So they do get instilled in your mind as a Muslim, whether you internalize it to whatever degree. Obviously, it doesn't play out in this barbaric, horrific manner, but those views are very much internalized by, I would say, even many nominal Muslims. If you walk down the street, like now I eat pork now. So if I'm having a pepperoni sausage and like a hijabi lady walks past me, she will squirm a little bit, because I also look in their eyes visibly Pakistani or Middle Eastern to them, i.e. I look Muslim to some degree. So they're very grossed out by just something very basic that I'm doing. So I'm just trying to give some context about how prevalent this mindset is. So following from that, this follows very nicely and kind of overlaps, that you have the us and them mindset. But this is what we wanted to touch on as well. The Islamic principle known as al-wala wal-bara, which is loyalty and disavowal, essentially commands Muslims to direct their love and allegiance towards what Allah or God pleases and allows, while hating, avoiding, and distancing themselves from what he displeases or forbids. So in essence, it calls for loving and supporting fellow believers and rejecting non-believers. But I will also say this: when we go to radicalization trainings by Prevent, This concept, al-wala wal-bara, is one of the most searched concepts and mentioned concepts by extremist jihadis who are being radicalized in the process or have been radicalized. So this isn't just we should only allow what Allah allows and forbid what he forbids, in terms of like, oh, no pork, no alcohol, no interest. No. This is actually saying like Sharia needs to dominate the world because that's what Allah wants. So it actually extends itself as a concept all the way to, this is why I will go and fight jihad to enact this principle of al-wala wal-bara, because in enacting my jihad, and I'm trying to make the world closer to a place where this concept is now in application. Does that make sense? So also, just before that, I wanted to quickly mention a point here before I forget. There's a video recently that's come out. It's circulating on X, but just to show you the again how this plays out. Mohammed Hijab is seen speaking to a Saudi man, and the Saudi man is talking to him about the grooming gangs, and he asked Mohammed Hijab, "Do you think that Muslims are superior, or Saudis are superior to white British people because they're Muslim?" And he goes, "Yeah, of course they are superior. They're ethically superior." Is that what he said, David, if I'm not mistaken? You've seen it too, right?
Yeah. And then he was like, but how are you better? It's like, wait a minute, you just said they're superior, and that's based on your religion. But I mean, just think about that. Like, what criteria other than your religion saying it? Like, what exactly are you pointing to? Because I mean, the entire context is Mohammed Hijab complaining about how racist these guys are, and they attack him and call him they hurl racial abuse at him because I think he's 20% black or something like this. And like, the entire context is him calling them out for being racist even towards him. But on the drop of a dime, he'll agree, nope, you are superior because of Islam. It's like, okay, what identifiable criteria can you point to that makes them superior to some other group?
Yeah, we'd love to hear it, because clearly, like, nothing in this doctrine allows for that. And once again, he's very confused as an individual, because the day England was playing, he had his England shirt on as well, and he was all like, yeah, go on England. So either they're racist and they don't want you here, or you love this country because it's allowed you to spew your nonsense for so long and say things like, or your minions like Ali Dawa also spewing things like, oh yeah, we'd watch you be executed in a perfect Sharia state, and all you weaklings who change your religion, that's your free speech you're using to cuss us out like that, essentially. But can you imagine if they're so okay with watching the beheadings of apostates, and casually he says it, like, wait till we get a perfect Islamic state, which will never happen, dream on, buddy. But like, this is how casually they take beheadings, and he's like, I'll have the popcorn and I'll be proud of it. Like, they're very desensitized to violence. So anyway, I could digress and go on about him for ages, but I'm sorry, I'm just, he's not worth the oxygen. But what I'm trying to mention is that al-wala wal-bara, this principle, don't Google it too much, because you will get a knock at the door from the Popo. When we were doing the radicalization training, they said, please don't Google that and where it shows up in Islamic training manuals, because it shows up a lot. But this is a huge motivational factor for Muslim men to try and that's why they say, if you even take a normal Muslim man in Tower Hamlets and you say to him, do you want Sharia law in Britain? He'll say yes. And you'll say, well, what happens to a woman who commits adultery in that? He said, we would stone her. I think there's an American YouTuber, and he's just gone around now asking these questions, and that's what they're saying. And he's only mindlessly saying that they would stone a woman even in England if Sharia was here, because of this concept. Obviously, this comes directly from several Quranic verses, which the inquiry states, let not the believers take the disbelievers as allies rather than of believers. Whoever does that has nothing from God unless you guard yourselves as a precaution. So this is a very interesting verse, actually, because this latter part here, unless you guard yourselves as a precaution,
that's
is where the interpretations of basically lying to save your life or to protect Islam or to further your goals of making Islam, progress in whatever way, this will allow you to deceive non-Muslims, essentially. And this is where taqiyya comes into play. So also, this part here is quite telling, let not the believers take the disbelievers as allies, because people again extend this to, we are like, even Muslims, let's say, who are not part of this grooming gang circle, if they know that this was happening, they wouldn't go and tell the infidel police on their own fellow Muslims as well. And this is backed up by further hadiths which tell you it is much better for you to shield the crimes of another Muslim than to bring disrepute, Islam into disrepute, or fellow Muslims into disrepute, and it gives you rewards in heaven for doing that. So David, do you want to comment on this? This directly relates to you. And
I mean, I wanted to add a little more to 328. So there,
Sure.
the translation is allies. The word in Arabic is awliya, which is kind of a broader term. Sometimes it'll be translated as friends, allies, protectors. It kind of encompasses all sorts of basically people you're on very friendly terms with and can count on. You can count on these other people as your friends or allies. And it says, don't take disbelievers as awliya, as friends, as allies, and so on, rather than of believers. And whoever does that has nothing from Allah. So, hey, if you're genuinely friends with non-Muslims, you have nothing from Allah, unless, so there's an exception, unless you guard yourselves as a precaution. And so the idea there is, yeah, if you're just openly showing your contempt and hatred for non-Muslims, well, that can work as long as you're powerful enough to get away with it. What about in situations where you're a minority and you showing your genuine hatred and hostility towards the non-Muslims might endanger your community or cause people to be suspicious of your community? Well, then you can pretend to be friendly with them. You can pretend, just to be clear with everyone, I'm not saying that if a Muslim is friends with you that he's trying to deceive you or something. You have all kinds of Muslims who have no clue about what this says, and if you did point it out to them, they'd say, "Oh, this is just in war," or something like that. They would reinterpret the passage somehow. So I'm not talking about what your Muslim neighbor actually believes. I'm talking about what Islam teaches on this. It's Ibn Kathir's commentary on this verse, where he says this: unless you guard yourselves as a precaution. He says this refers to Muslims in some areas and at some times when you're basically you're surrounded by a more powerful force. And so in those cases, you can pretend to be friendly. And that's where he quotes Muhammad's companions. He quotes Abu ad-Darda saying, "We smile in their faces while cursing them in our hearts." So, okay, they're more powerful than you. There's nothing you can do. So smile in their faces. Yes, we're friends, cursing them in their hearts. Oh, I can't wait until we're powerful enough to do what we really want here. And then he also quoted Muhammad's companion. Ibn Kathir also quoted Muhammad's companion, Al-Hasan, who said, "Taqiyya is allowed until the day of resurrection." So Muslims are going to be in these situations a lot. So just remember, you can always deceive these guys if it's for the sake of the Muslim community.
Thank you for that, David. Again, it goes on to specify Jews and Christians, where it's kind of hard, David, to not take Jews and Christians as friends or allies when you're kind of living in Judeo-Christian countries, or do you know what I mean? You're living in countries that operate on the basis of those values historically, and people are believers, some very much so, some nominally, but this kind of explains to some degree why there are enclaves where they just Muslims just like to keep themselves to themselves. Maybe they're acting this out to a large degree. I don't know. I'm being very facetious here, but in general, it's hard to, not, and then it's hard for you in your mind as a Muslim to be, because again, I'm speaking from my lived experience when I was told as a child as well, oh, we're not like them. Those are Jews or those are Christians. And again, all those things, I hate to say this, but they eat pork and so they're dirty. They sit in pubs, they're dirty, all of these things are taught to you. But then having a experience in Britain, I think maybe that's why I wore hijab at 9 and I tried to assert my Muslim identity, because how are you telling a young child who's born in London, where that's meant to be your home and you're supposed to integrate and even assimilate, but yet you're saying you're you and they're the other, and there should be a strict divide between you, and you should. I know it's very sad to say, but I know some people in the community where I used to live who are second and third generation British. They sound like any other English person, and they're not allowed to have non-Muslim friends, David. They're not allowed to have non-Muslims come over or hang out with non-Muslims. When they go to university, they have to join the Islamic society and nothing else.
Yep.
Sorry, it's so whack, but it is true. So, again, just sheer hatred for the other. I'm very glad, again, that this was brought into the inquiry. It's mad for me to be reading this level of scrutiny of Islam in a British inquiry. Like, I still can't fathom that. It's sometimes I feel like I'm dreaming. I'm so glad this is finally happening in our lifetime, and there's a semblance of these victim survivors to get justice and for them to be heard when they say they operated like terror networks. They recruited young men as if they were recruiting terrorists, with incentives, with money, with the promise of sex, with the promise of this like brotherly, you know, like camaraderie, giving them a sense of identity, putting them on pedestals. All of this is happening in the same way that they recruit vulnerable men or men who are looking for purpose to ISIS or something. Anyway, as David was saying, these passages emphasize that Muslims should maintain strong bonds within the Muslim community while keeping non-Muslims at a distance and harboring enmity towards them. That's the key word here. It's not just like, oh, let them exist, they're different. No. They are your enemy. They are to be treated as such. The Quran warns that God views non-Muslims with contempt. Look at the use of the wording. And that Muslims who befriend, ally, or associate closely with them risk being regarded by God as disbelievers themselves. You wouldn't want that, would you, as a Muslim? Allah forbid. While some Muslims downplay this doctrine, revivalist movements, which have gained considerable influence in Western countries, have actively promoted it, presenting strict adherence to loyalty and disavowal as vital for the Muslim community's success in carrying out its divine mission. And I think that's what ties it back to why this concept is what also enables men to go on, do jihad. And because they say, like, whenever they talk about Sharia, bruv, we need to get Sharia back in the UK, bro, it's actually just to say the Western state of affairs, the current laws we have, what they call like what's the word they use? They use a specific word to be like how depraved the West is, because there's bars and there's clubs and there's casinos and women are free. They literally say we need to fix things and we need to bring back the concept of only what Islam forbids, and these guys are our enemy. We need to show them the right way. Beyond its theological role, al-wala wal-bara has profoundly shaped certain Islamic cultures. In such environments, many Muslims feel strong pressure not to say or do anything that could damage the image of the Muslim community or bring discredit to Islam. Within an honor and shame-based framework reinforced by these values, speaking out to outsiders about wrongdoing committed by fellow Muslims is often seen as an act of betrayal. Indeed. And that's what I was referring to with, why would you go and rat to the English police or the British police force on your fellow Muslim? It's looked down on.
And that goes way back, even before stories about the grooming gangs were popular, back when this was in the context of terrorist attacks. And it was, it was a study to figure out what percentages of Muslims support terrorist attacks and so on. And you'd have, some percentage of Muslims who actually support the terrorist attacks. But then came the question, if you don't support terrorist attacks and you're not participating in one, but a Muslim who is going to carry out a terrorist attack, would you inform authorities? And I don't remember what the numbers were, but it was disturbing numbers of people who said, no, I'm not going to do it. I don't support terrorism, but no, I'm not going to tell on someone who is. Of course not. Why would I do that?
Yeah. See, and again, this extends to, I'm not going to say this is the mentality of the wives and the other family members who are aware, because again, it sickens me to say, but many of those wives were actually okay with the act or the justifications behind the abuse that were given and the rapes that were given, was that, yes, she was wearing loose clothes, or white girls do have loose morals, or their parents don't take care enough of them, like, you know, they just send them out onto the streets to do whatever. So the families that were complicit also had, like, it's the same like thing as why terrorism becomes justified. There is such a agreed upon justification for why to do something, and again, that's why these grooming gangs can be compared like that. But David is right, exactly, like that. Those, for the individuals who would know, that's why you're disincentivized from the religion itself to go and rat. So this dynamic can have serious real-world consequences. For example, in her book, The Imam's Daughter, Hanan, later known as Hannah, described her experience as a 14 or 15-year-old Pakistani teenager in Britain. After confiding in a female teacher that her father, an imam, was beating her, the teacher informed the deputy head, who arranged for a male Pakistani Muslim social worker, why of all people would you do that, to meet with her at school. Initially terrified because of his background, Hanan eventually opened up to him about being treated as a domestic servant, fearing a forced marriage, and enduring physical abuse. That same afternoon, she returned home to find the social worker speaking with her father and relaying everything she had said. While the social worker was present, her father acted kindly, but once he left, her father subjected her to a severe beating and rape, threatened to kill her if she ever spoke again, and imprisoned her in the cellar for days. When Hanan later encountered the social worker at school and refused further contact, he reportedly told her, "Hey, I was just doing what I thought was right. You know that. It's not right to betray your community." Similar patterns have appeared in accounts from grooming gang survivors. Some have described approaching the police only to be interviewed by Muslim officers who switched off the recording device and urged her to abandon her complaint due to a supposed lack of evidence. And what's interesting here is that when you look at the cities now that are about to be investigated, like Bradford, the towns like Keighley, and even London, which has the largest proportion of Muslims in the UK, there's such a high probability that you would get a Muslim police officer come and attend a situation, or if you go to counseling or therapy, that you're going to encounter a Muslim therapist or a Muslim counselor, or if you go to the social services, you're going to encounter a hijabi social worker. And so how you are expected to get impartial, free and fair judgment and a safe space to tell your truth when they have such an in-group preference when it comes to loyalty and protecting the ummah and covering for their fellow Muslims and making sure that, oh, God forbid what she's reporting might be deemed Islamophobic, let's not pursue this case. There is such a high chance that that would happen, and it has happened in these cases, because all of the places that these incidents have taken place have been heavily Muslim populated areas. Not just that, but our government is so weak and so against its own people that they actively discourage white English people from applying for police positions and open it up for diversity to more and more Muslim, South Asian, etc. police officers. I've had the same thing when I escaped Dubai and came back to England and I went to get therapy for my PTSD. I was so nervous that I was going to get a Muslim therapist, because why am I going to talk to a therapist about escaping Sharia law when they hold all their Muslim beliefs near and dear? It makes no sense. I don't want to waste my time. And thankfully, mine was an Iranian lady and she was the head of the curve and already disliked Islam. So that worked out great for me. But in the same breath, the government is so aware that this could happen. Like once, David, honestly, I was going back to Dubai to see my parents from university when I was here studying. I was going back for the holidays and they stopped me at the airport just because girls my age from my background are usually forced into marriages in Pakistan and they're sent on a one-way ticket back or something. So as I was going through customs, they just pulled me to the side and they're like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "Yeah." And they're like, "Are you sure? Is there anything you want to tell us?" And I'm like, "No, why?" And they're like, "We're just saying that if you need any help," they dropped me a card for like forced marriage. And they went, "Are you being taken or sent anywhere against your will? Who's meeting you on the other side?" And I was like, oh my God, like I'm going to have the most chilled out holiday in Dubai to see my parents. Like, don't worry about me. But I just realized that, oh shoot, they must see this happen so much through the airports that they think, right, we need to like, do stop and searches and make sure some of these girls are okay. So on the one hand, they know this is happening. And on the other hand, all of these safeguarding mechanisms are infiltrated with people who, as this report said, have a deeply ingrained culture of enforced loyalty and community protection that can discourage individuals from reporting abuses or providing evidence against members of their own group. Had the social worker in Hanan's case reported disclosures, leaving her father facing criminal damages, he would have exposed himself and risk being labeled a traitor within the community. And that is absolutely so true. The only reason I can speak and speak freely about what I say is because I've completely cut myself off from any Muslim or Pakistani community. I have no connection with them, and I could not care less what they think of me. So they don't have that hold on me anymore. Like, I'm sure many of you know, Lubna used to speak out. She was still Muslim, strangely, but she would speak out just about the British Pakistani issues. And they've hounded her, and I think they've forced her into silence again. Thankfully, I don't have that issue, and I won't be silenced. But that's what they do. They intimidate you, or they even just the thought of the intimidation is enough for you to not speak up, and therefore you become complicit.
And it's also the non-Muslims are so indoctrinated to be terrified of accidentally doing something that might get them labeled a racist or an Islamophobe or something. I mean, just think if an 11-year-old girl walks into your police station and there are Muslims and non-Muslims in there, and she's going to be accusing Pakistani Muslims of something, if you're a non-Muslim, you don't want to deal with that situation because you're terrified that, by investigating this, you're going to be called a racist or an Islamophobe. So what would you do? You'd say, oh, let me make sure my Muslim colleague deals with this situation. That way he can't be called a racist or an Islamophobe. Well, guess what? That person's primary loyalty is to the Muslim community. And it's the same with social workers and so on. If there's a number of social workers here and a Muslim girl comes in, do you as a non-Muslim want to be the person who tries to help her? Of course not. It's just in your mind. I might say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing, and then I'm going to be labeled an Islamophobe. Let me get my Muslim colleague to help with this girl. And again, there's a good chance that Muslim colleague of yours, that his or her primary loyalty is going to be to the Muslim community. And so the girls just don't get helped.
Exactly that. And you see that, like, I do have like white colleagues, and when we get cases dealing with them victim survivors reporting, anything to do with Islam or honor-based culture, immediately, like, they look at me to be like, well, do you want to handle this? Because they're so afraid to say the wrong thing or come across as, being Islamophobic or judging the culture. And I'm like, you know what safeguards we have in place. You can judge this culture exactly how I am judging it. Do you know what I mean? But because you're so afraid to say it, because society has been set up for you to be afraid, I'll say it for you. And I'm trying really to also make them think that, hey, if you see malpractice or you see abuse within any culture, just call it what it is. They're so afraid to ask them sometimes, David, like, oh, so your ex-partner, were you blood relatives? I'm like, just ask if there was a cousin marriage there, in their family. Like, they even tiptoe around those issues to be so sensitive to, that's just what they do. Well, we can discuss that. We can talk about the fact that it's wrong and it leads to, all those issues it leads to. But sadly, English people have been muzzled. And so the only people who are left policing their own culture are these kind of social workers. And then you see abuses get left to be rife and happen. And like, who do these, again, with ex-Muslims, with people like Hanan, who do they have to turn to then, really? They're just kind of left in the wilderness. So it says here as well that the prominent Indian Pakistani Muslim thinker and revivalist Abul Ala Maududi, he's very, very famous in Pakistan.
I have probably half a dozen at least books by Maududi.
Oh, there you go. See, he's extremely influential and problematic. But anyway, in his influential work, Let Us Be Muslims, he maintained that Muslims cannot achieve true success until their highest allegiance is given to God and the Muslim Ummah community. The doctrine of loyalty and disavowal exerts particularly strong pressure when Muslims live as a minority in non-Muslim host countries. In such settings, as they seek to preserve and assert a powerful collective identity, Muslims may place even greater emphasis on an internal solidarity and separation from non-believers than they would in their countries of origins. Exactly. You see that in their enclaves. You see they have their own Sharia enforced areas, or they like to call it no-go zones, or they have their own Muslim gangsters, because they have such a birds of a feather flock together mentality. Us versus them. We will be our own little collective. We don't rat on each other. We stick together. And this is a huge difference. And this is why I think, again, another reason why multiculturalism cannot exist. Because as David was saying earlier, when you import these kind of cultures, which are so heavily tribal, yeah, these cultures, especially Pakistani Mirpuri culture, it's actually called a biradari system. And Connor Tomlinson's done some great work on this, especially from a Western perspective. I was actually shocked. But biradari is the tribe, and it's the clan. And these families operate within a clan dynamic, whereas Western countries have evolved to focus on individualism. And they operate as individual nuclear families by and large. So there is such a stark difference there. These clan dynamics will necessarily automatically create more of a in-group preference, where you do see the other as something to be fearful of, be disgusted by, and keep yourselves away from. And so you don't let the dirty laundry of your community be aired in public. Okay, let's move on to, this one is coming out of every page of Islam, but the superiority and dominance of men over women. Would you like to talk a little bit about this, David, to us, and explain what, in your understanding all these years, what you think about this dominance of men over women in Islam?
Yeah. So I mean, Surah 4, verse 34 says that that men basically control women because they provide for the women. And so if a woman is getting out of line, your wife's getting out of line, it's normally interpreted as a progression. It's not what the verse actually says. It's admonish them, then banish them to beds apart, and then beat them. So I mean, as far as the flow of the verse, it kind of fits if there's an escalation, but there's no reason, as far as the verse is concerned, not to skip to the end, or not to interpret it as based on like the severity of how much you're concerned. The really terrifying thing about the verse is that the woman doesn't actually have to do anything. It doesn't say, if your wife does this, if she rebels against you, if she goes, doesn't say. It says, if you fear, and it'll get translated differently as if you fear rebellion, or if you fear disobedience, or it'll get translated differently, but it's if you fear it. It's not she does something. If you simply fear or are concerned that she may be doing something, or she may do something, then you can admonish her, banish her to a separate bed, and beat her. And so that's part of the reason that Muhammad said a man will not be asked as to why he beat his wife. Well, why? It's not like a trial where you have to show that the woman actually did something. It's based on the man's own understanding of his wife and whether he thinks that she deserves a beating. And this is what the historical background of 434 is, that a Muslim man hit his wife in the face and like left his handprint on her face. So she goes to Muhammad with her dad. Her dad takes her to Muhammad to kind of settle this. And Muhammad at first was advocating for retaliation. So I'm not sure exactly how that would work, but maybe the girl's father was going to go just slap the crap out of the dude. I don't know. It's a weird situation because retaliation doesn't do the trick, right? There's a difference between hitting a man and hitting a woman. So I don't know. I don't know if it would just be, well, slap him back or something like this. But so Muhammad was going to pronounce retaliation and judge in the woman's favor, but as he's sending them out, he gets his revelation, and it's men have a right to beat their wives. And then he says, I wanted one thing, but Allah wanted something else. So, I mean, Muhammad actually makes himself the good guy in this situation. Yeah, I didn't want your husband to be able to beat you, but, you know, Allah, he sided with the husband, and your husband has the right to beat you. And so we hear all kinds.
Cheeky sod.
Yeah. So we hear all kinds of things. Oh, this just means tap them lightly with a toothbrush or something like that. The problem is we see how this plays out in the Muslim sources. So it's Sahih al-Bukhari 5825, Sahih al-Bukhari 5825. That's where you have a man who beat his wife until her skin turned green. And Aisha brings this woman whose husband beat her till her skin turned green, brings her to Muhammad and says, I have not seen any woman suffering as much as the believing women. Look, her skin is greener than her clothes. She had on a green dress. And Aisha says her skin is greener than the green dress she's wearing. And so anyway, Aisha was hoping to get justice for the woman, but Muhammad actually ended up condemning the woman. But, this guy obviously wasn't tapping her with a toothbrush if he beat her until her skin turned green. And notice that comment from Aisha saying that she hasn't seen any woman suffering as much as the believing women. She's saying that Muslim women were treated worse than pagan women. And this ties into what you were mentioning earlier, that, people from any background can end up doing really bad things. But why, what's going on with Islam that it seems to be much more of a problem? Well, yeah, you could always have a guy from some background who's a hothead and a scumbag and beats his wife. That could happen for Jews, Christians, atheists, whoever. But there's one ideology that says, hey, God says you can do this. And you can always have from any background, you could have some guy who goes out and rapes a woman. But there's this one ideology right here that says, oh, and it's cool with God. God wants, and matter of fact, you're actually the good guy if you do this, and they're inferior, and that's why it's okay. And so anyway, this seems to be playing out in many different ways, that it's like Islam takes all the bad things that men are inclined to do, beating women, rape, all these things, and it just gives them the thumbs up from God. And so you could always have a guy who lacks self-control, or he gets enraged and beats his wife, but it would be like a bad thing for him to do that. And, later on he might feel bad, or if he doesn't, he's an even bigger scumbag, but that wouldn't be something that he could be proud of, or something that he wouldn't try to hide or conceal. But in Islam, it's just, no, this is actually cool with God. In fact, you need to do this. You need to beat your wife if you fear rebellion. How else are you going to keep women under control? And again, the result is that Aisha, whose title in Islam is the mother of the faithful, said, and she got to observe Islam in all its glory, because she's seeing Islam as it's implemented during the best generation of Muslims. Muhammad was asked, what's the best generation of Muslims? He said, my generation of Muslims is the best generation of Muslims. And from her observation, learning Islam from Muhammad himself and being in the community of his companions, and her dad is the first of the rightly guided caliphs. I mean, no one's in a better position to see the impact of Islam on women than Aisha. And her reaction upon seeing this was, we now have it worse than even the pagan women have it because of these revelations.
Yeah, and I think, David, she's one of the majority of the hadiths, actually, she's one of the most quoted, within the scriptures of the hadiths in Islam. She, a lot of our narrations of what was going on come from Aisha, actually. So she very much was giving, whatever you may believe about Islam historically, she was giving us real-time information about what she was experiencing there in the life of Muhammad, obviously. Exactly what David said. She saw physical domestic abuse happening, and she presented a case to Muhammad, giving him the chance to be the arbiter in this, and have some moral judgment and say, as the prophet of God, I forbid anything like this. But as David said, he wanted to, but Allah said, that's your right, guys. You're allowed to keep doing that. And I think this is important to mention as well. Thank you, Hisham. He says modern translations water down the text to make it sound less dramatic. Just look out for the parentheses when reading the text in English. And on that, if you read this 434, you will see that when it says, and then beat them or strike them or admonish them, it says lightly in brackets at the end. It wasn't there before westernized and before the internet came to all be all eyes on Islam, there was no concept of beating lightly or with a toothbrush or, with nothing thicker than your thumb or something harking back to Victorian times like that. Essentially, what I think that theme of the toothbrush comes from as well is historically in Islam, they used to have the miswak, which is like branches, almost like twigs kind of put together that they would clean their teeth with. It's still a phenomenon in the Arabic world. If you go to the Arab world, men still use that because they think it's sunnah, because the Prophet used to use it. But with that, they would also make like kind of makeshift whips to whip their chattel. So if you've got like your kind of chattel of animals around you and you need to whip them, or you need to whip your camel, you would use that. And so they would essentially use the same thing to whip the wives or whip the slaves. And then in the hadith, it says not to beat your slave women with the same veracity. Not to beat your wives with the same veracity that you would beat your slave women. But essentially the same device was used because women in Islam are considered as chattel. They are also an extension of the property of men. So yeah, you get all of that. And actually, even Umar ibn Khattab, one of the rightly guided caliphs and Muhammad's right-hand man, actually even said like a woman who isn't able to bear you children is worse than, he describes it as like a doormat made of those twigs. So you can see how they view women even in Islam in Muhammad's times. And that's also where you get the concept of male guardianship, the wali system. I'm not going to go into how this is applied in the Muslim world, but you all know I've talked about growing up in Saudi Arabia, and even in Dubai, I had to get permission from either my dad or my husband if I wanted to work. You need written permission in Saudi Arabia. As a Saudi woman, you need permission to be able to travel outside the country. You're basically like a glorified child. You're never like a woman with your own agency. And the concept that David mentioned in the beginning, that if you fear disobedience, I think you all know that disobedience aspect, nushuz in Arabic, is the Sharia law that they put on me in Dubai to try and punish me and take me back to my husband's house. Because I had fled, he couldn't separate his beds or beat me. So they had to go back into the law and say, how do we deal with disobedience from a wife that's fled? And the answer to that is ata'a zawjiyya, which is disciplining the wife to force her back, like, against her will. And so you can't leave your husband's house without his permission, essentially kidnap. But that's exactly the same Quran that they invoke to do what they did to me. So you can see how they treat women in general. But the reason I wanted to discuss the male relative concept real quickly in this grooming gang context is because you definitely also see when the perpetrators quote the difference between Muslim girls and non-Muslim girls, they always say that, oh, Muslim girls are protected, we protect our girls, we don't let them dress like this, and we don't let them go out on the streets, and we don't let them be sexually promiscuous and drink alcohol. So in their perverse minds, they actually think that this guardianship extends to, just because white girls are free and more empowered to live their lives, that there's something faulty and dysfunctional in their family dynamic, and therefore they are fair game as well, because they have looser morals, because they don't have that family structure. So that's how they apply that logic to non-Muslims, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and it's a really screwed up situation in that your society can advance to a point where it's safe for girls to walk around on their own, and you would normally look at that as something good. Girls don't have to be terrified walking down the street or walking home from school, because we've got a society where they don't need some sort of protector, and Muslims look at that as, oh, fair game. And the result is going to be that unless something changes, girls are going to need a protector at all times to protect them from the Muslims, who are going to see them as sexual property. And then it's going to like, Great Britain is going to have to become like a Muslim country in terms of girls can't walk down the street without a male protector anymore.
Absolutely. And I mean, that's the same thing that guy in Tower Hamlets who was interviewed by the American, I don't know, sorry, forgive me, I don't know who he is, but he's apparently a really famous YouTuber.
I think it's Nick something.
I think so, yes.
Yeah, because he was doing interviews in the US as well, and then I saw recently that he'd gone to the UK, so I'm assuming that's the same guy.
And this man is essentially saying what you just said, David. He said, oh, well, women wouldn't be walking around like this. And then he went one step further and he said, but I've also heard that Moss talking about stoning them. And he went, oh, no. And he went, oh, wait. If she commits adultery, then yes. And he was like, oh, so that's okay then. So this is what they want when they say Sharia for the UK. This is actually what would happen to women. So all of you white, liberal, progressive women who think that I'm being bigoted by speaking against my own faith, this is what it would do to women. So you can't claim to stand for women's rights and then also say that this is some exotic religion or culture that you like to fetishize because the perpetrators over a skin color that you think aren't oppressing you. This is how they oppress their own women. And that's also how they turn it to abuse your women. Again, Surah 2228 declares that men hold a rank above women. The Prophet Muhammad, as we know, stated women are deficient in both religion and intelligence. Cheers, mate, relative to men. And in the same hadith, he noted that women form the majority of those in hell. Hell yeah, that's where the party is. He also taught that if a woman or dog passes in front of a praying man, the prayer is invalidated. Okay, of course, again, there's marital rape within Islam, so you can see their views on rape in that context, because if she refuses, the angels will curse her until morning. So many Muslim women really hold on to this. But today, the focus is on how Islam affects non-Muslim women, so I'm going to focus on that. So we'll ignore
there was a video that was that eventually got scrubbed from the internet, but yeah, this was like way back. This is before YouTube. This was circulating just on some other site or something like that, but it was a clip, and it was a Muslim scholar somewhere in the Middle East, and he was saying, did you know that in America you can rape your wife? And we're sitting there watching this going, what do you mean you can rape your wife in America? And you thought he was about to condemn some sort of abuse in America or some law in America which allows men to rape their wives. And I was thinking, what? Where's this guy getting this information from? But anyway, he says, did you know that in America you can rape your wife? And he looks around and he goes, how can you rape your wife? You have a right to do what you want. And I was like, oh, he means that there's a concept. There would be a concept of forcing yourself on your wife in the United States where you could actually be punished for raping your wife. And he's just saying the concept makes no sense because you have a right to do what you want with your wife. So it's not something that it shouldn't even be a thing. It shouldn't even be a possibility, the possibility of even raping your wife.
Wow. And it's the exact same thing in this sense. And also in this sense that they mention here in terms of zina, which is sexual intercourse between a man and a woman who is neither your wife or your slave. Now, I wanted to get your take on this, David, because so in my mind, it says, obviously, let me just finish here. There is no distinct offense of rape. And I did, when I was, again, giving my evidence to this inquiry, I also mentioned this fact. Where is it? This part. And I said, you need to have 4 male witnesses who directly observe, I like to call it the ink pen in the fountain position thing happening. So you need to see the pen going into the ink, essentially, and 4 men need to see that, which is effectively the man's penis entering the woman's vagina. I don't know in what world that would happen that was not sketch. Do you know what I mean? Like, that to me is just wild. But I wanted to ask you if do you think that when these perpetrators are raping these white girls, in their mind she is in the category of a sex slave anyway? So for them it doesn't constitute rape in their mind. They don't have that conscience of I'm committing rape at the moment, I'm committing zina.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, again, as I was mentioning earlier, during the time, during Muhammad's time, you could take female captives and they'd be your sex slaves. And so you have Muslims today who would say, but what these guys are doing isn't that. We're not conquering them. And so I think they've just changed it to, well, yeah, you had to fight people back then to take these girls as your sex slaves because they were going to protect the girls. Well, over here, they're not protecting the girls. So we're just taking the girls, right? we're allowed to do this as Muslims. We've conquered them in a different way. We've conquered these people, this nation, in a different way, not by marching an army out and conquering them, but just with, words. We've conquered them with words. And so these girls are our property now. I think that's the mentality.
Well, okay, I think, let's see if does it talk about that here, because I think it would, in terms of being in a state of war. Yeah, here we go. Islam's treatment of conquered non-Muslims people. So I think this relates to this. And David, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that they extend it to the concept of Dar al-Islam and Dar al-Harb in their mentality of what's happening.
You're at war. You're at war with Islam is at war with the UK, and so you are in a state of war, and you can take these girls.
Because in some of the testimonies, David, they actually have said to the girls as well that we're here to degrade you. We're here to humiliate you, but also the British state. They've actually mentioned the words British state, which is also how rape is used as the weapon of war in general. It's not just to humiliate and degrade the women, because sexually violating someone is one of the easiest ways to degrade them and crush them. So you're not just crushing your enemy, but you're crushing the state behind it, because the way that these girls were targeted on an industrial scale shows you that they're trying to put the middle finger up to the British state as well.
Yeah.
And so if you look at the concept of Islam being at war with non-Islamic states, Islam is always trying to encroach and turn the world from Dar al-Harb, which is a house of war, into Dar al-Islam, which is every country under the domain of Islam, under one giant caliphate or whatever they want. But at that point, you are at various levels waging your own war against that non-Muslim state. So in their minds, and this is why I'm saying the grooming gangs can be seen to be operating like terror networks, because in their mind, they are committing a level of jihad against. So how to humiliate the British state is to humiliate, target them, like hit them where it hurts, humiliate and sexually violate their young girls. It's the same mentality that soldiers have when they rape an army to degrade them. And with Islam, that counts as, what does Muhammad say in all the battles that he's done? He literally goes and genocides entire Jewish communities and then takes the women as spoils of war and rapes them that night. There's been times when he had to have a guard and a tent. I think it was when he took Safiya and captured her after killing her husband, her brother and her father. And even Muhammad's own army was like, are you sure you want to do this? Because Muslim women like to say that Muhammad had all these wives and this was like some consensual, loving relationship. It absolutely was not. He would get these women as spoils of war, as war booty, and swap them. They would swap them around with the Muslim fighters at that time. And this is how they're treating these girls. The way that they are, some people, they got picked up, they get passed around up and down the country. Again, I hate to say this, but when it came to Eid, some of these victim survivors described on Eid, it was like a celebratory thing. They expected girls to be there at their disposal. And they just took turns with these girls, and they were being gang raped. They were being passed around like they were literally, pieces of actual meat. David, any thoughts on that, or should we carry on?
Oh yeah, just on Muhammad and Safiya. That's a good example of just like Muhammad having no self-control. There are these passages which said Muhammad liked three things above all else: food, women, and perfume. Food, women, and perfume were his favorite things. But it was after the Battle of Khaybar, so Muslims attacked the Jewish settlement at Khaybar. The Jews of Khaybar were just going out to their fields to work on their crops and stuff like this when the Muslims swept down on them and attacked, defeated them. But it was a Jewish woman. It was a Jewish woman whose husband, father, and I think her uncle were all killed by the Muslims. And this woman offers to cook dinner for Muhammad, and he accepts. And so he just slaughtered all the men in her family. And she says, hey, I'll cook dinner for you. And he accepts. And that is so absolutely insane. You could line up 10,000 people from all over the world, anywhere, and say, hey, if you've just slaughtered a woman's entire family and she says, I'd like to cook dinner for you, do you accept? 10,000 out of 10,000 would say, no, that's a really bad idea. But Muhammad loved food. He had no self-control. So he eats the meal. Well, I mean, he starts eating the meal that she brings to him, which was poisoned. His companion Bishr actually turns green and dies from eating this food. Muhammad realizes it's been poisoned, so he spits it out. And but it did some sort of internal damage to him, because 3 years later he said he was dying from it. So it's basically, guys, if let's say 5 grams of a poison will kill you, well, what happens if you consume 3 grams of the poison? So it doesn't kill you right there. These things can do internal damage and damage your organs, so that you end up dying later after repeated infections and so on. But think about this. That happens right after the Battle of Khaybar, that Muhammad almost dies because he can't resist food offered to him by a woman whose family he just slaughtered. What happened right after that? Well, he hears news about Safiya, who's super hot. Now, Muhammad had his companions torture and murder her husband, Kanana. And then he gets a brilliant idea. Hey, let me take her back to my tent. And yet one of his soldiers stands guard all night. But I mean, think about that. He just almost died because he couldn't resist food, even though the woman preparing the food was someone whose family he had just slaughtered. And then he takes a woman whose husband he just tortured and killed, and say, hey, let me take her back to the tent. And one of his soldiers has to stand outside the tent, because Muhammad didn't say, hey, stand guard. He's just like, ooh, hot woman, let me go bang her in my tent. And it's his soldier who has a bit more common sense. Wait a minute, Muhammad's eventually going to get tuckered out and he's going to fall asleep. What's this woman going to do? And so it's his soldier who stands guard outside the tent, listening to the noises and stuff in there, because he realizes, hey, that she might actually kill Muhammad. Again, this is right after another woman who was in a very similar situation just tried to kill him. And it's just like, this guy has no self-control at all. Something involves food or women, he loses all self-control. And this is the guy who is the pattern of conduct for your entire religion. And we see, I don't know, we can kind of see the impact of that all these centuries later.
Yeah, absolutely. And also the incident that David is talking about is it makes the Quranic prophecy come full circle, because it mentioned that if Muhammad was a false prophet, it would be as if his aorta would be cut. And when he was at the end of his feeling like he was dying from this poisonous food that he thankfully did ingest, because I'm glad that was his Achilles heel, if not one of them. But he said his like one of his last few words, where I feel as if, oh, Aisha, I feel as if my aorta is being cut. And so it's just confirmation of of him being the false prophet that he was. But again, just want to touch on this, because this is what we see time and time again through the victim survivor testimonies, where oh God, this is horrible. Again, disclaimer, I'm very sorry. This is just, it has to be brought to light. But in Rotherham, for instance, one perpetrator named Mohammed, branded his victim with the letter M as a mark of ownership. Survivors have been described being compelled to perform domestic tasks such as cooking and cleaning for their captors while enduring repeated sexual violation, mirroring the treatment of household slaves. So then a journalist, Andrew Norfolk, captured this mindset when he observed some of these Muslim kids have got an idea, probably because it's quite convenient for them, that Britain has been designated a land of war. So certain things have become permissible in terms of the enemy. I think some of these guys think it's okay to do stuff to white girls that they wouldn't dream of doing to Muslim girls. And this ties into everything that David and I have been discussing, the complete delineation and demarcation between Muslim girls and white girls because of all their morals, their lack of male guardians in their family, and the fact that they're in a perpetual state of war. They want to put a middle finger up to the state, And now these girls, because they're not committing jihad, offensive jihad on horseback, this is the stage of war that they're in. And in their version of it, these are their spoils of war, and they're the sex slaves. They are who their right hand possess in the Quran, who are okay to rape. Like I said, that the concept of zina doesn't apply to them in this kind of mentality that they're operating in. And that's why I don't think it would even play on their conscience what they're doing is wrong. And that goes all the way back to that perpetrator literally uttering the words Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim before committing rape. The same way a sister of a perpetrator shouted Allahu Akbar as the girl was passing her in the court to give her evidence. So they genuinely have like these weird religious bits that they latch onto to justify the depravity of their behavior.
And I think Andrew Norfolk, I think that's from like 13 years ago or something.
Oh, okay.
That he was pointing that out.
Oh, wow. I mean, this has been going on since, some would argue, the 1950s even. Do you know what I mean? This is how far back this goes. So again, we've got the Dar al-Islam and the warfare that's happening. So I'm so grateful once again, Rupert Lowe's inquiry. What am I seeing right now? It gives me so much hope that they've gone into the nitty-gritty of the barbarity of the Islamic scriptures. And this is a big one, jihad and sex slavery. And essentially it's what David and I have already touched on. But Islamic Sharia contains detailed regulations governing armed conflict, including provisions related to the institution of slavery. In Islamic law, slavery arises as the consequence of warfare against non-Muslims. And that's what I mean. If it's perpetual, then you can see how they can justify that slave approach to these girls. And so non-Muslim captives taken in such conflicts are regarded as lawfully, and that's the word here, lawfully, which is why it doesn't count as zina or rape. Because remember, Muslims will tell you, especially Muslim women would like to tell you, oh, we're so protected, and you know that the punishment for rape is so stringent in Islam, you're not allowed to rape. But actually, when you permit somebody to be that which your right hand possesses, or you make them legally enslaved to you, then a Muslim man, no concept of rape applies to that. And also, the parameters for a non-Muslim woman getting the same protections under Sharia for rape is very different from a Muslim woman. And you've seen the provisions for a Muslim woman. It's absolutely ridiculous. Even in a country like Dubai, you wouldn't go and tell them you've been raped. It's better for you to leave the country. That's what happened to, I think it was forgive me if I'm wrong, but like a Brazilian or some woman, as if she was there to be part of the World Cup in Qatar. And she was part of FIFA, the administration, and she was raped in Qatar, and she just fled back to her home country because she would have been convicted for having sex outside of marriage as opposed to being raped, even in a modern country like Qatar, who's hosting the World Cup. So there we go. This is what they're relying on. Under Sharia, sexual relations between a male owner and his female captive slave do not constitute zina. It's explicitly authorized in multiple Quranic passages and supported by numerous hadith precedents. Moreover, Muhammad taught that a married non-Muslim woman captured in war is automatically divorced from her previous husband by the act of capture itself. And so it does not amount to adultery. That's
the hadiths that are associated with Surah 4, verse 24, because it had already been revealed. Yes, you can take women as your sex slaves that you capture in battle and so on. But in battles before Surah 4, verse 24, it was you killed the men in battle, and so you then take the women. When Surah 4, verse 24, I think it was the Battle of Hunain, but there they captured the men and the women. They captured the husbands and the wives, and so Muhammad's companions were like, "Oh, we know we're allowed to take female captives as our sex slaves, but we captured the men and the women now. So isn't this adultery? Isn't this adultery right now? We're going to go take married women back to our tents." So they asked Muhammad, and that's when Allah revealed Surah 4, verse 24, which says, yes, married women are forbidden for you unless you capture them in battle. And so, yep, their marriages are annulled. They are still your sex slaves.
Yeah, exactly that. Thank you for that historical reference as well. So I think, again, we've covered, even just in the natural conversation that's flowing off the topics we're on, we've kind of captured the other aspects as well. For example, the seclusion of women in Islam. You're supposed to, it's not even as like Victorian times for children where you're meant to be seen and not heard. It's actually like you're not even meant to be seen in Islam, to be honest. You're not meant to be seen, you're not meant to be heard. In Afghanistan, women under the theocracy of the Taliban can't even sing or laugh loudly, because even that is deemed to be temptation or fitna for men. So again, perpetrators have said time and time again to these white girls that our girls don't do this. Our girls are pure. Our girls are reserved for marriage. So they basically take the white girls and have all their most perverted, whatever barbaric, horrific things they want to do. They do them with these white girls, and then they want to marry a good Muslim girl after all of this. And that's, again, part of the us and them, the othering, the delineation, just because by virtue of being Muslim, Muslim girls have a higher morality, especially ones who are covered. The ones that don't cover, then they start having issues. But they think that because of Muslim women don't wear the same types of clothes in their mind as white girls, that they are more modest and they should be protected. And I'm sorry to say again, coming from a Pakistani heritage, I must say that this is something that is like, it's like almost joked about, as in like a Pakistani man growing up can have like, you know, a dozen white girlfriends, but he's gonna marry a Pakistani woman at the end of the day. This is just like a general thing that it is assumed, and they say and they joke about. So it's like anybody up until marriage you can mess around with white girls, but then when it comes to actually settling down and having a family, you will go and marry somebody from your own kind. Do you know what I mean?
Well, it's a bit more of your own kind than that, because it'll most likely be your first cousin.
Touche. Yeah. It's very much keeping it in the family most of the time. So yeah, this is another thing where it says this Surah 33, which instructs women, stay in your houses and do not flaunt yourselves. Once the perpetrators have forcibly converted some of these white girls to Islam, you do find in their testimonies that they're trapped in the house, so they're further isolated. One of the victim survivors in this inquiry said that she wasn't even allowed to look outside the window. And so they're forced to cover from head to toe. As I said, the only time she could leave the house is with her husband and walking behind him, as if basically you are living in Taliban Afghanistan. So this also plays a massive part. It's just the insane kind of treatment of women. Forced marriage in the age of consent. Oh yeah, this is what I wanted to touch on as well with David, is the fact that because Muhammad married Aisha at 6 and then raped her at 9, this is why a lot of these men find it absolutely okay to be abusing girls as young as, 9, 10, some even younger, that they have no concept that they're abusing a child, because their alleged most perfect human being has done the very same thing. So when a Western mindset hears these stories and they're like, oh, like 11 years old, like, they're not even like the age of consent according to the law here, it is because that doesn't apply. When you see all of these migrants who are being taken to court for raping, because the stats have gone through the roof, and they're going for children, they're nonces. The justification, like I said earlier, they give is that in our culture, I didn't know this was wrong. They actually say that. And it goes back to Muhammad's marriage to Aisha. Again, it's mentioned here that she was 6. And also, religious authorities permit a father to arrange a marriage for his daughter when she's still an infant. So can you imagine that there's, and what David and I said at the beginning, no lower age limit in the Quran. It's not just Muhammad's actions and what we find in the Hadith, but the Quran itself allows that for marriage. So even when they're abusing young girls, it is in their mind, the age is not a factor.
Yeah, so you got a few things here. So you have Surah 65, verse 4, which talks about how long a prepubescent girl has to wait before the next guy can marry her and have sex with her if her husband divorces her. Notice it doesn't say, what are you talking about? She needs to wait until she grows up. It's just, nope, she has to wait 3 months, because the background of that is that it had already been revealed that if a man divorces a woman, she has to wait 3 monthly menstrual cycles before she can marry another man. So by the time of Surah 65, verse 4, the questions had arisen. What about women and girls who don't have a monthly menstrual cycle, either because they're too old, they're too young, or because they're pregnant? And then so Allah answers that. But his answer to the issue of girls who are too young to have a monthly menstrual cycle is just have them wait 3 months instead of 3 monthly menstrual cycles, because they're too young for a menstrual cycle. So you have that. You have Muhammad consummating a marriage with a 9-year-old girl who, according to the Muslim sources, was prepubescent. She was still playing with dolls. That wasn't allowed once you've reached the age of puberty. So young girls there, but also this doesn't get emphasized enough. It's in Surah 78 where it's talking about the houris, and the translations will vary, but like Arbery translated the description as those with swelling breasts. And so that sounds like large breasts or something like that. But it got pointed out by Muslim scholars that this is actually a technical term for a stage of development. It's the stage of budding breasts. Your breasts, you get breast buds. So this is even before girls start menstruating. They're the first, basically you go from Tanner stage 1 to Tanner stage 2 when your breasts bud. Well, what's this mean? It means that the Quran is describing your houris, your virgins in paradise, as Tanner stage 2. They're at the breast bud stage. So this is before they ever start menstruating. And that's the goal. In Islam, every man is going to spend eternity deflowering girls who are at the budding breast stage. So that's like, what, 10 or 11 years old. And those are the girls that these guys are targeting, which means they're basically trying to get a taste of Islamic paradise here in this world.
Yeah, that is a very, very good point, David, actually. And you're right. Most people assume the breast thing to be like voluptuous breasts, as if like it's a fully grown woman. But you're absolutely right. It relates to kind of the first indications of puberty. And like, yeah, budding is a good word, as you said. But absolutely. And it shows why they hang around. Sorry, just exactly what you're saying. It shows why they hang around like child homes and care homes and things like that, where they know that they can pick up those ages of girls. If you look at all the ones where the abuse has started, it's from about 9, 10, 11, 12 years onwards. And it usually like ends when they're about 18. Well, thankfully they would have, got out of it somehow by then, but very young, they capture them. You're absolutely right.
And it's on their scale. So they don't have the Tanner stages, but menstruation is considered puberty, what they call puberty in the Muslim commentaries and so on. So these are, by Islamic standards, even on the Tanner scale, that would be like the first step in the process of puberty. From an Islamic perspective, that's prepubescent, because they have 2 stages after that by the time you get to a girl actually menstruating. So these are prepubescent girls from an Islamic perspective. And these are the ones, again, that Muslims spend eternity deflowering. They stay the same. They stay the same age forever. So these girls are always at the budding breast stage. You deflower them, and then Allah miraculously restores their hymens after you have sex with them, so that they're virgins again every day. This is the goal in Islam, is to get to Jannah, where you spend eternity over and over again deflowering girls who are at the budding breast stage. And these guys get this in their minds, and then they're going out and targeting 11-year-old girls, and everyone's can't figure out what's going on.
And David, I didn't want to bring this up, but now that we're in this territory anyway, I may as well, because I read it again in in a victim survivor's testimony and was horrified again, but she was actually like plowed with alcohol in the back of a car, and she was very young, this one. So let's consider what you're talking about, like prepubescent, if you will. She woke up to a man whose penis was between her thighs. And I think this obviously relates back to, again, I'm so glad again the inquiries touched on this. Aisha, before she reached puberty, and others in Islam, they permit thighing. Can you explain this to us, David, from your understanding?
Yeah. So, and as far as how this actually plays out in the Muslim sources, so there's no minimum age for having sex with a girl, but they didn't want to. They were actually concerned about causing fistulas and so on, because then you've damaged the girl. And then what you see in the commentaries is they were concerned about making two holes into one hole. So they're concerned about ripping the girl open. So they wanted to have sex with her as soon as they could, but they understood the risks of actually just ruining your new wife.
Oh, well, sorry, David, just to cut you off right there, because Islamically, according to Sharia and the fiqh around this, is that she becomes unlawful for you if you do that. So it's kind of like you lose out. She's not yours anymore. Whereas if that doesn't tear, she's still yours. So yeah, it's not just for the protection of her. It's actually you lose possession of your wife.
Yeah. So as far as I understand it, when they're talking about not damaging or harming the girl, they have this harm principle: don't harm the girl. And then people hear it today and they think, oh, so they wouldn't approve of having sex with a young girl because it's hurting her. They're not talking about hurting her. They're talking about like permanently damaging her. So their main concerns with young girls was, one, that you actually cause a fistula, you rip them open, and then she's ruined and she's off limits for you. Or two, that she's so small that you just like crush her during sex. So they were concerned about girls actually having a little bit of weight to them and so on. But notice, how do you determine when a girl is going to be safe for sex and you're not going to cause a fistula? Well, you'd kind of need to be playing around with her a little bit, because you don't know exactly when that's going to be safe. And so you'd kind of fool around with her. I think this is where, like the thighing and stuff would come in. You want to be fooling around with her a little bit in bed, and you can put, your penis between her legs and things like that. And after doing this for a while, maybe a couple years, then you find out, actually, I think she can handle it now. And now is when we'll actually consummate the marriage.
Disgusting. I mean, every time I have these discussions, I'm so happy I left this behind, because this is beyond sick. It's absolutely sick. And YouTube, we're not endorsing this. We're discussing what Islamic doctrines say about this. We're discussing it in light of abuse that can happen based on these doctrines. So please don't silence me for that. So David, I've just gone through this as well, and I think we've covered the main tenets of Islam when it comes to perpetrator mindset and Islamic allowances and loopholes and Quranic verses that they're relying on, or concepts. We've done the supremacy, we've done female sexuality, we've done jihad and sexual slavery, dominance of men, age of consent, the lack thereof, really. Did you want to bring up any other topic you think we've also done the way they treat non-Muslims? Anything else you wanted to touch on before? I'm mindful we've come past the 2-hour mark, so people's concentration starts dropping off around this point. Anything else you think is really important to mention that we haven't Islamically?
Not really Islamically. It's more like for everyone else. Like, if you've gotten to the point where you would just let this happen because you're so terrified of being called a name or being called an Islamophobe or something like that, and so we'll let this go on. My goodness. My goodness, you go back a couple generations, people had to march out into battles and so on with guns blazing and dying in battle. And now you've got entire nations filled with people who are too scared of being called a name to stand up for little girls who are being gang raped. Everyone needs to sit back and rethink their priorities in life. It's good that all of this is finally coming out, but guess what? I mean, there were people pointing this out over 15 years ago, pointing out what's going on. You look at what people, again, like Tommy and others were pointing out was happening. It's exactly what is just coming out now, and everyone's shocked. Okay. Everyone's screwed up. Nothing. You can't build a time machine and go back and undo the fact that tons of people, police, prosecutors, judges, social workers, teachers, everyone screwed up. Okay, now it's being exposed. Now all you can do is move forward, and you of course have to deal with things that happen, but you can't undo those. What you do have completely under your control is what you do in the future. And I seriously hope people learn a lesson from this and say, you know what? Of all the various principles and so on that are going to guide me in my conduct in life, fear of being called a name cannot be high up on the list of priorities as far as what's going to control my actions. So anyway, yeah, those are my thoughts. And this just happened right now, so time will tell. If Great Britain goes back to the status quo, my goodness, that would be really, really bad.
Yeah, no, well said. I'm shocked. Honestly, I'm shocked at the scale of what's happened. I'm shocked that there weren't communities that came out like this, the Sikh patrols did, to protect their own women, despite what the law or the conversations about being called racist were telling you. I mean, there were fathers who were out looking for their daughters every night when they were with these perpetrators who were plowing them with drugs and alcohol, and the father was reporting his daughter missing night after night, to the point where they had a professionals meeting, and the policeman told the dad to stop reporting his daughter missing. That policeman himself, thankfully, was fired eventually, but this is the level of, what word do you even use to show that the level of contempt and disregard they had for these girls' safety? And as you said, David, they started calling them child prostitutes. They blamed it on lifestyle choices. They actually had a time when they would think that these girls were genuinely more into brown men. They thought they had a fetish for these brown men. And so they were deliberately going out and befriending these men or choosing boyfriends who were older than them because they had fancy cars, and they would drop them off. And I mean, we've come so far as a society from then. I would hope now that we are righting all these wrongs slowly but surely. And like I said, I'm skeptical about the full extent to which this inquiry will go, but I'm hoping for the best. And what they're saying with the lip service that we will investigate all lines wherever the evidence takes us, I'm hoping, will you stop just before it gets to Islam? Because thankfully Rupert Lowe didn't, and this is the kind of conversation we need to have if we want to end this. I think someone mentioned this as well in the comments, but I alluded to this at the beginning, that the London inquiry, not just London, the Bradford, mark my words, Bradford, Keighley, and even Oldham is going to bring up some things where people are like, if you thought Rotherham was bad, wait until these areas are investigated. As I said, I think we have barely scratched the surface when it comes to the level of abuse, and watch this space for how London might be the key hub for the networks of how these girls were trafficked up and down the country. So very quickly, I will go through super chats, and I'm really, really sorry. I know people were sending super chats throughout. I just really didn't want to disrupt the flow of the conversation, but I appreciate each and every one of you, and thank you for the super chats. Honestly, I could have stopped in between, but I just thought David and I really need to just bang out these different Islamic doctrines. Otherwise, we would get sidetracked a lot.
Yeah, and the London, I mean, you brought this up earlier, but the London investigation is going to be very interesting because, like everyone else, I did hear for years, well, if it's an Islam problem and there are so many Muslims in London, how come this doesn't exist in London?
Exactly that, because London has the largest Muslim population. But you need to also remember that Sadiq Khan would never want to say that let's allow investigations here, because one, he needs the vote bank, and second of all, it would fly in the face of him saying how safe and multiculturalism is such a perfect utopia in London, according to him, which it still is. Right after this, I'm going to make a quick video on Sadiq Khan and how disgustingly smarmy he is when he's still being questioned tomorrow. Because I was actually going to play it here, but I think it deserves a video in its own right because of how horrible this man is when he can't even be bothered to apologize to victims. Anyway, I'll get through these super chats very quickly in case there's anything for David in here as well. Joe Levers 7627, thank you so much. I think this was for you, David. Oi, what's this then, eh? Get this Islamophobe out of here. Oh, hi, David. Something, TikTok, time to rock. And much love to you too, Nuria. Isn't that your infamous intro, David? TikTok, time to rock?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, well, Islamophobe and proud, I think. Both of us here. So thank you for that. Pegasus, I think you asked this earlier, but you're saying if this is the scale of grooming gangs and rape in the UK, I wonder what the true scale of abduction of Coptic girls in Egypt is. A Copt here. Yeah, you know what? These adjacent inquiries could be really good for all other minorities that are living within Muslim majority countries. Like we talked about Pakistan earlier, when Christian girls, Hindu girls, the same thing happens there. Forced abductions, forced conversions. I think in India they call it love jihad, which is a term floating around. Some people use that for grooming, but it would be very interesting. I don't have any figures on that. Do you, David?
No, but I mean, it is. It should be worthy of note that you have lots of Muslim countries where, Muslim populations like 98, 99% and so on. But in the places where you have large numbers of non-Muslim minorities, so Pakistan, where you have a bunch of non-Muslims, and Egypt, where you have a bunch of non-Muslims, you have the same sort of thing arising, that you just take a girl, get her, even if you have to beat her or torture her or whatever, get her to sign something saying she's a Muslim now, and then she's off limits for her parents can't do anything about it. But I mean, notice Egypt, completely different part of the world from Pakistan. You end up with the same thing. But this was a couple years ago. But me and AP, we got tattoos, and we got these in a Coptic tattoo shop. And at some point, one of us asked, "What's the minimum age for getting tattoos in this Coptic tattoo shop? And what's the minimum age?" And the guy goes, "Oh, 16. I thought, "Oh, okay, that's pretty similar to like the US." And he says, "Unless you have parental permission, then any age." I'm like, wait a minute, what? I said, wait, if a parent comes in, you would tattoo a toddler or something like that? And he goes, "Yeah, sure."
Oh, wow.
And that was confusing. So I actually posted it on like X or something like that. I was like, hey, you guys know that cops will tattoo even like little kids and stuff? And then it was Coptic Christians who explained it. They said, we've been doing that for centuries. And it was because back in the day in Egypt, a Muslim could just walk up, take your daughter, and then you go tell police, and police go, and he says, "What are you talking about? That's my daughter. She's always been my daughter. What are you talking about? They're trying to, she's mine." And so the cops actually started tattooing crosses on babies and toddlers and so on, just for identification purposes. So they'd start tattooing young. Yeah, see, yep, cops tattoo their children with crosses for identification. Yeah, and you can even see, you can see a Copt today. Almost every Copt you meet will have like it'll be faded lots of time, but they'll have like a very faded cross tattooed on their wrist.
Oh my God!
Because they get those when they're little kids.
That is crazy. Even as Tanky was saying, I was like wondering where your like nice tattoo story would go, and then it just turns so dark all the way back to like needing to identify your child in case they get abducted by Islam. And yes, what came to my mind straight away with young children being abducted is like the Janissaries of the Ottoman Empire, essentially. So
Tucker said that Tucker had a guest on a couple days ago, said that the Ottomans were very nice to Christians, even though they're demanding their quota of young Christian boys to be turned into Muslim soldiers.
And that's something they should be grateful for.
Yeah, it was very nice to take these young boys from their parents and turn them into jihadis.
Rip them away from their family and their homeland and everything they know, and make them loyal to the Sultan and ready for jihad, and forget every childhood memory they have, so they have no other loyalties. Wow, the guy needs to seriously read some history, mate. Like, but I also found out, David, just the other day, that the reason that church bells ring at noon in many of the European countries was back in the day, when it was the Ottomans were doing the siege of Belgrade, and the churches would ring for Christians to pray that they would win against the Muslims, and then that that tradition never really stopped, and now it's actually to mark like victory, but also to remember for them to pray and stuff. So when you hear church bells at noon across major European cities, that was now it's actually as victory against the Muslims. So that's one good thing, but also it was there to have Christians pray against the Muslim invading armies coming in. So yeah, really fascinating tidbits of history there. I did not know that about the cops. That's crazy. I understand why they would allow them with parental consent. I absolutely stand by that now.
Yeah, when you said, well, that took a dark that's how it was for me. I was like, hey, did you know cops are weird and they tattoo even little kids? Isn't this weird? And people are like, there's actually a reason for it. And they're like, oh, that makes sense then.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. You carry on then if that's the reason. Serial Bowl 7038, thank you so much for your super chat. Have you seen the responses to this report? It turns out that there are major methodological problems with the 250,000 number. Look, my only answer to that would be we are still investigating. Court cases are still going on. This is current. A few weeks ago, 15 men were convicted for 180 years between them for crimes that took place between 2007 and 11, which didn't come to light until recently. Also, if the number was even 1, this would apply. Everything we've talked about today would apply. Whether it's 1 or 100K or 200K or 1 million, it still matters. David?
Yeah, as far as the 250,000 number, yeah, I mean that's explained as an extrapolation. You're taking the things you know and then saying, okay, what about all the places we haven't investigated or don't have actual numbers on? It'd be the same if you said, if you tried to say, okay, how many girls were raped last year on U.S. college campuses? Well, there are all sorts of problems. You don't have all the data on all the college campuses. And even if you had numbers of everyone who reported being raped, that doesn't, lots of people most don't report being raped. And so if you were trying to establish a number, trying to come up with some sort of figure of how many girls were raped on U.S. college campuses, you'd have to say, okay, here are all the cases we know. Here's the number that we know. Here's where we have solid data. Here's what we know about how many report versus how many we don't report, and you'd come up with some figure. Guess what? You could challenge that number because it is based on some inferences and so on. But yeah, it's basically the best you can come up with at that time, the best estimate you can come up with at that time. And then you do more, if you want to be more accurate, then you continue doing more investigations. But let's just say it's a lot. It's a lot, right? I mean, quick investigation in Rotherham turned out 1,400 and so on. And that's one small town. That's one small town. So is it going to be 250,000? I don't know. Is it going to be more? Don't know. Could it be less? Yes. But yep, that's their kind of working figure.
Thank you, David. We'll move on to Walds8396. Thank you very much for your super chat, Walds. When internet in its infancy stage, the first ex-Muslim who exposed the cult was Ali Sina. He wrote a book, and I'm not sure he's still alive. Hi, Nuria. Hi. Yes, I am aware of Ali Sina. Actually, I think he was one of the first ex-Muslims. I've read about him in some detail. I believe he's alive. So yeah, go check out his work if you haven't already. He is one of the OGs of highlighting Islam, actually. So mad respect for him always.
Yeah, that was from Faith. He had Faith Freedom International. They actually used to do some really, really funny stuff. They wanted to show how gullible lots of people were with these like scientific miracles and so on. So they would he put out a fake journal article one day, because you had to make it believable, right? You had to make it believable, and then the Muslim Dawa guys had to think that they had like stumbled upon this. So they post, and they did this multiple times, but one of them was a fake journal article about a scientific conference in Israel where a Jewish expert was an atheist, and he was pointing out that there can't be a literal Adam and Eve. And he argued that you couldn't have a literal Adam and Eve because Adam and Eve would have had to have had all the genetic information for all their future descendants, all in just them. And he said, for there to be a literal Adam and Eve, Adam would have had to have been 90 feet tall, right? And so it's framed as an atheist saying that this is impossible. The Dawa guys ran with it. Yes, you see, they just proved that Muhammad was right. Muhammad said that Adam was 90 feet tall. And here you have this Jewish atheist saying the only way there could have been an Adam is if he was 90 feet tall. And they all ran with this. And then they'd let them run with that for a couple weeks. And then they'd expose it and say, guys, we wrote that journal article just to make fun of you guys. But yeah, they used to do some seriously funny stuff back then.
But nothing's changed, David. Still, if there's any journal that is so sketch that confirms their thing, they'll literally go to Speaker's Corner and they'll be quoting some random journal because it backs up their thing. But it's funny how they would like to rely on a Jewish atheist then for that information. You know what I mean? Whatever serves them at the time. Oh, sorry. Where were we? Grapes to Jannah. Oh, okay, I nearly read that wrong. Thank you for your super chat. Leftists and BLM also call cops pigs. That is very true.
Yeah, I was thinking that the entire thing, basically everyone who didn't like cops back in the day in the US used to call cops pigs. Yeah, exactly. In England you have some very peculiar names as well that like you'd only know if you were kind of brought up here when you hate the police. But pigs specifically, I think, is the only one I've heard Muslims use more recently. So, but yes, you're absolutely right. Oh, this was a comment from before. This is so sick. No, 100%. I'm worried if it's happening in America and we don't even know it. Yeah, I was going to actually get your thoughts on that, David. That's why I think I flagged this message. Are you worried that this might be a phenomenon happening in America as well on some level, if not industrial level, like here? Yeah, what you would hope is, as screwed up as the grooming gang scandal in the UK is, you hope it's a wake-up call for everyone else in all other countries that they need to be vigilant and keep their eyes on things so that it doesn't happen everywhere else.
Absolutely. Totally concur with that. And again, I think that it is different depending on the migration from which countries. I think maybe you'll see elements of this potentially within the like Somali diaspora in, where is it, Minnesota, that they are in large numbers or something. But yeah, it plays out differently in Europe depending on where the immigration majority is from Muslim countries respectively. So even like across European grooming gangs, they take on like Afghani nationalities, Somali, Iraqi, Kurdish Muslim as well. It's just in England the Pakistanis were overrepresented, and that's why we focused on them today as well. Hujintao. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. I really do apologize. Thank you so much for your super chat. I met a self-proclaimed liberal Muslim Uber driver in London. When I criticized Aisha's age, he said Muhammad wasn't a nonce. He just loved kids too much. You non-Muslims won't understand. Wow.
He just loved kids so much he needed to bang them.
Oh my gosh. Can't even verify that with a response really, besides the fact that how can you say anything against your perfect man? Do you know what I mean? And this is when I realized that how Islam really is like the cult of Muhammad, if you will, because when I was leaving it as well, and this really bothered me so much that I was like, why has nobody else around me asked this question? I remember asking it to my grandmother, and she also turned around to me and ignored my question, but she said, Nuria, if you don't love Muhammad, you're never going to be happy in your life. And I just thought that was a very strange answer to a very normal serious question I had. And I thought, why do I have to love this man who I've never ever met, who's done something as disgusting as this? And yet you're saying all my happiness of the whole entire happiness of my life hinges on me loving some dead man who married a kid and was a nonce. Absolutely not. I tap out of this religion. Thank you very much. Grapes to Jannah again. In Japan, oh, thank you again, Grapes to Jannah. In Japan, Muslims are burning down Shinto shrines they deem Shinto pagan and shirk. You know what? I'm actually seeing a lot of footage coming out of Japan from Muslims like being a bit of a problematic demographic these days, and they're going and trying to have a Sharia center installed, and then I saw a Shinto shrine. So, and I didn't know if it's actually happening or not, but if that's the case, that is awful, and Japan needs to clamp down, because they've got, I didn't think that they would tolerate it even for a moment. So if the Muslim demographic there is getting bigger and bigger, and they are trying to infringe slowly by doing these things, I saw a video where they did go and damage an entire Shinto shrine, because like I said, in Islam, shirk is the biggest sin. It's like when Muhammad was in Mecca and he wanted to assert Islam, one of the first things he did was go and smash the 360 idols that were in the Kaaba. So Muslims get a lot of thrill out of demolishing idols. Look what the Taliban did to the beautiful Bamiyan Buddhas in Afghanistan. Gone. So I wouldn't be surprised if it's happening, but if it is, Japan, please get your act together. David?
And that was historically a pattern as well. They used to take over Hindu shrines and temples and turn them into mosques, but they would take the Hindu idols, smash them to pieces, and then like pave the walkway with them, so they would walk over these smashed idols as they walked into and out of the mosque.
Jeez. Hull Jintao again, thank you. David, I sent you an email to Wood Apologetics Hotmail, to you too, Nuria. Do check out the game score and share it with others on the stream, please. Oh, what's the World Cup saying? I don't even know who's playing right now. I need to go check after this. It will derail the stream, so I'm really sorry. I won't do it right now, and I'll get all football into a football frenzy. But I will definitely go check out what's happening. And maybe we can talk about it. I'll post something, because
Hu Jintao, if you're talking about soccer, there's no scenario where I'm interested in the score.
David's not going to be opening that email. It's going to be on red.
only slightly, because AP keeps telling me that the U.S. is about to play Turkey, and I don't care what the sport is. I'd like to see Turkey get crushed.
I was going to say, you want to see America whoop Turkey, right? Surely.
Yes.
Okay, so you'll be watching that one, we can assume, David, yeah?
Oh, I won't be watching it. I'll be interested in the score. That's about it.
Okay, I thought you were going to put your USA glad on and be cheering, but okay. Well, anyway, go Team USA all the way. England and America playing each other on July 4th, I believe, which is very ironic. So that's going to be a fun one, if I'm not mistaken. Carl Scher is saying, keep your cool, Nuria. I don't know if you mean keep my cool, because I was getting into my impassioned rants during I can't keep cool reading that inquiry report. I'm sorry. If you meant because of the heat, I'm trying my level best, so thank you. Infidel, thank you so much again for being in the house. I've seen you've been commenting throughout. How about these two superstar hosts? Always love the cross communitying, but I'm a huge fan of women's rights, so only a fan of one host. Oh, is that a dig at one of us? I'm assuming. And David here, I have no idea if there's is there some beef, David, on the side?
I think he's just saying women's rights and I'm a man.
Ah, gotcha. Well, thank you so much, Infidel. Genuinely, really, really appreciate it. Harbinga, thank you as well for your super chat. Is Shabana Mahmood fair, you ask? I don't know in what regard you mean fair, but I've just commented on her on a video of mine as well, when I mentioned her and Naz Shah in relation to the grooming gangs. And I just think, because they're women of Pakistani heritage as well, and they're in positions of power, they have not done enough on this issue at all. And Shabana Mahmood, I find her quite dangerous, because she openly says Islam informs every single decision she makes. So Islam is like at the forefront of her being in such a high position in the British government. And I don't think you can have British interests and also have Islam as your motivating factor behind every decision. Those two things are a massive conflict of interest. So I find that very dangerous when somebody is so pious and they hold a position of high office in this country, and then also, are they going to really, like she didn't ban Pakistan or put it on the red list in terms of immigration, where we have massive amount of abuse from that country, and polygamy and bigamy and all sorts. So I find her quite problematic, to be honest. And then AP, the OG AP was in the house, or is in the house. I don't know if you're still watching AP, but if you are, welcome. It's been a while. Welcome. And thank you so much for your super chat. You didn't say anything or send a sticker, but thank you. I guess you're just waiting for Turkey to get beaten by America, really. Did you want to comment, David? I think...
No, I'm just when AP didn't even leave a comment, I was just like, because he's too busy watching soccer. That's all he cares about for the past couple weeks. Yeah.
Okay, so he just threw us a couple of notes and was watching football.
I was like, hey, let's go. I was like, hey, let's go live. Like, yeah, there's a game on. I have to watch it.
Oh wow, AP, who are you supporting? Let us know after Turkey. There's no way AP is supporting Turkey. I don't buy that for a minute. Yeah, AP, let us know if you're still watching. Who are your top 3 teams? And yeah, England, America should be fun. Maybe we should have like a watch party or something. Thank you though, AP. Where did that go? Okay. Mantis M Shrimp. Thank you. Became a YouTube member. Welcome to Beyond Belief. Everything you see and hear and watch on this channel will pretty much be beyond belief. So welcome. Infidel member for 7 months. Whoop, whoop. Free ex-Jew infidel. Oh, free because you got a free super chat because you're a member and you're Jewish, so you have to avail it. I don't know if that's a joke. Sorry if it wasn't, but a former Muslim to a former Jew, we were allowed to make those jokes. Baz, hi Baz, lovely to see you here. Thank you so much for the super chat. Great live, Nuria and David. I will say it's not easy for Lubna. She has to put the safety of her and her young kids first. The nutters keep trying to dox. Look, I totally understand. That. If I was like, in her position, raising my kids as a single mom, I would put nothing but their safety first and foremost. So totally understand why she has to do what she does and be selective. But I would also say, like, if it's that risky, really, no need to throw your hat in this ring. Safety first.
And they do seem to have more of an obsession with Lubna than they do with lots of others for some reason.
I think it's because, David, and I could be wrong, but I think it's because she's a Lutonian as well. So she kind of lived where Tommy did. And I think once you're part of that cohort, like, it's that whole thing that, like, don't you dare snitch on us. Like, who are you to air our dirty laundry in public kind of thing. And she must have quite a lot of connections within Luton and stuff. Like I said, because I grew up in the Middle East for so long and I just came back here, went to university, kept myself to myself in terms of just my family, people don't have any kind of hold over me. I'm not really connected with any Muslim communities here, but I feel like she would have been coming from Luton. And you know how quite religious and extreme they are from Luton. I mean, there's like a hub of so many extremist mindsets and there's such an enclave there. So I think that's why they really extra doubly go after her, but I could be wrong. Yeah, but see, Hisham saying Lubna still identifies. Yeah, I also thought they would be calmer on her because she's still a Muslim. She never criticizes Islam. She just, like, what's her tagline is like bad apples or something, whereas I'm like, no, the whole damn bucket is rotten. Like, let's get rid of that. And she's just like, no, there's bad apples in it. So she only talks about those, but I think it's the Luton thing. Oh my God, thank heavens I did not come from Luton. That place is cursed, I tell you. Andrew Tate's from Luton, so another reason to add to it. Stacey Dooley's also from Luton, but she's amazing. Disclaimer, Stacey, I love you. But yeah, you did produce Andrew Tate's and loads of the 7-7 bombers, so you guys do have a problem on your hands. Okay. Who's this? The Redneck Aristocrat. Thank you for your super chat. What do you think will happen in the UK in the next 5 years? Civil war? The indigenous Brits are beyond fed up with this. I totally hear that. David, do you want to give us your thoughts, and then I'm happy to share mine.
Here's what's weird to me, and has been weird for a long time. So, the people who've been pointing out, for 10, 12, 15 years where this inevitably leads, right? You've got Muslims who have higher birth rates, plus you're constantly bringing in more of them. And even though you will have plenty of nice, peaceful Muslims, what Islam actually teaches eventually rises to the surface, because the people who start pointing it out when it's relevant, they've got the sources on their side. And if Islam just coexists with everything else forever, then okay, you don't have the sources on your side. And so they basically start winning those debates, and they'll start labeling you a heretic if you are a Muslim and you don't get on board when it's time. So anyway, point is, Muslims make up like 6.5% or something like that of the population in the UK. And look at the situation already. This is the situation when Muslims make up 6.5% of the population. When Muslims make up 10%, that's going to be a bit more difficult of a problem to deal with. If they get to 20%, that's going to be even more difficult to deal with. The point is, there are times when you can deal with Islam peacefully. You can expose the ideology, stop protecting it from criticism, get rid of troublemakers and things like that. You could do all that peacefully. You reach a point where you can't deal with it peacefully, and you have to deal with it violently, because they won't let you deal with it peacefully. They'll get violent, and so you have to deal with that. But you have all these people who've been advocating for years, hey, right, you've got a window where you can deal with this peacefully and not through a huge bloodbath. Why don't you deal with it now before you get to the stage where you end up with a bloodbath? And it's, no, you're a racist, Islamophobic, hate-mongering bigot. What we need to do is completely ignore this and defend and promote Islam at all costs until we pass this off to the next generation to deal with, when they'll have a bloodbath. And it's like, how do you view yourself as the good guy in all of this when you're the one who's producing a bloodbath and we're trying to avoid the bloodbath? I don't know. So anyway, yeah, it's basically a situation where the longer you wait to deal with the problem, the more of a bloodbath you get. So I'd say jump on it real quick, because 5 years from now, much more difficult problem to deal with. 10 years, if you only decide to deal with it after 10 years or 20 years, horrible bloodbath. Yeah, war.
I mean, a lot of serious political commentators are using the word civil war, and they have been for a while now, because the UK has almost been what's it called, on the brink for a very, very long time. It's like a powder keg just waiting to explode. And with every single incident that you see of migrant rapes this, or asylum seekers done this, and then on the back of this entire grooming scandal that's come to light with now the connections with Islam, I can understand how the indigenous Brits are fed up. I'd have Islam fatigue, I'd have Islamophobia fatigue, I'd have migrant fatigue, I'd have woke fatigue, I'd have DEI fatigue, I'd have the government hates the native population fatigue, because that's how it's been for a very long time. In my entire lifetime, I've just seen, I'm so sad. I haven't experienced a government a strong leader. Who was the last one? And I can think back to maybe Margaret Thatcher. I wasn't around during her time. I've just seen a bunch of coward leaders, one after the other, or ones that hated Britain and wanted some kind of globalist multicultural society that, as David and I mentioned, you have no idea who you've let in. And then you think a disaster like this won't happen. So I think the next few years are going to be crucial. The next general election, if we make it to then, is going to be extremely important. And I do think, I'm listening to podcasts every day that the right is fractured, blah, 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 and the left is so much better at organizing because the right is too individualistic and there's too many egos. But seriously, we need to flip the switch now. We need to get ourselves together if we want to reverse everything that's been done. I think it was Liz Truss that she says it's going to take at least 50 years to undo the laws that have come in from Tony Blair's era onwards that have destroyed Britain. So we need to leave the ECHR, all of these human rights laws and things that are allowing migrants to stay here when they've committed crimes, because what do they say to their judge? Oh, my son doesn't like foreign chicken nuggets, only British ones. And the judge accepts that. And we have to accept that as a society. Like, the rest of the world is laughing at us. We are the laughing stock on the world stage. Even without, we can't even retain a parliament, prime minister can't even finish his premiership. And now we've got a potential prime minister coming in who's got zero mandate and is even worse than the last weak, cowardly man. So genuinely, I'm not surprised we're fed up. We all are fed up, but we're in this together. And hopefully if we play the game right, we need to beat the left at their own game and just do away with all the crap that has infiltrated society for, honestly, since I've grown up. I've never seen a strong Britain with borders closed and enforcing British values and teaching British history and being proud of who you are and stopping the boats. It's not that difficult. Anyway, I can go on for ages, but you told me to stay cool earlier. It's very difficult to stay cool.
Judges need to learn two very simple words to start dealing with that. Hey, you be a lawyer advocating why this kid needs to stay in the country because he only likes British chicken nuggets. Go ahead. You be the lawyer.
So, Your Honor, how can you deprive somebody of their human rights, of really, really feeling a sheer joy of a British McChicken nugget? How can you expect them to go somewhere else and potentially suffer from the lack of quality and food poisoning, and in a foreign environment be given second-class nuggets?
Too bad. Next case. That's it. That's all you have to do. Too bad.
Simple as that.
Too bad.
As simple as that.
Yeah. Or if they don't want to go in that direction, there's a great British rock band, the Rolling Stones. Start playing them a little song that anyone who grew up in the 1970s in the U.S., anytime they wanted something from their mom, they started getting, "You can't always get what you want." Rolling Stone. They'd sing it to them.
And there you have it. But also, if you've committed a crime, this doesn't even apply to you. Screw what you want. You're out of here. Absolutely out of it. You have no right to be here. David, please apply for a position of judiciary in this country. We need this level of scrutiny on cases. It's filled with woke judges who think that argument is acceptable for chicken bloody nuggets.
That's what I mean. That's like insane. You just, too bad. How hard is that? Too bad. You can't 100%. Always get what you want. Too bad.
100%. We're the laughing stock of the world. Honestly, that was a headline on a newspaper. I thought it was an April Fool's joke. Dan Dave RC, thank you so much as well for your super chat from Canada. Alexander the Great, peace be upon him. Oh, okay, right. It was the prophet of Allah. Islam has 2 LGBTQ prophets. Why Muslims not trying to find the iron wall built by Alexander? I think they think he was Zulkarnain in that, and so they
that's historically that's kind of indisputable. But Muslims eventually realize that because he's a devout Muslim in Surah 18, he's a devout Muslim who's even receiving revelations from Allah. So he's a prophet, but he's called Dhul Qarnayn. And historically, early on, this was understood to be Alexander because they were familiar with the story back then. But in the Syriac Alexander legend, which is a later like Christian fan fiction version of Alexander, the story of Alexander the Great, in this version, Alexander the Great is a devout monotheist who wants to prepare the way for the Messiah. So he's going to do a bunch of the work, then set up a throne. And then Alexander the Great says he's going to sit on the throne until the Messiah comes. Then he's going to get off the throne and give it to the Messiah. So he's not a pagan in the Syriac Alexander legend. But it's amazing. In the Syriac Alexander legend, this devout monotheist Alexander says, I want to find where the edges of the world are. So he travels west until he finds the place where the sun sets, and he finds it going down into this pool, and then it goes through this tunnel under the earth, but he actually follows it. and he follows it through the tunnel until he comes out to the place where the sun rises. And then there are people who live there, and they have to run for cover because they get burned up every time the sun comes out of there. But then Alexander the Great has to find his way back, and he gets to this place where there are these two mountains, and there are the hordes of Gog and Magog that are about to invade, and the people beg him, hey, Alexander, can you build a huge wall between these two mountains to hold these guys back? And Alexander, in the Syriac Alexander legend, had brought all these metal workers from Egypt with him, and so he has them coat the wall with iron and bronze after building the wall, and then he coats it with iron and bronze to make it last. And interestingly, Alexander in this story was given by God 2 horns that grew out of his head that he could use to gore his enemies in battle. And you look, every single one of these details is in Surah 18, and it's total fiction. Apart from there was an Alexander the Great, nothing in there happened. And it all ends up in the Quran. And so anyway, you go back to their early commentaries. They said, yeah, of course, this is Alexander the Great. Why? They were familiar with the story back then. Eventually, people weren't familiar with the story, and Muslims had to say, Muslims basically realized, okay, Alexander the Great was as pagan as a pagan can possibly be. So we can't say this is Alexander. So they start saying it's someone else, it's Cyrus or something else. Nothing actually fits, but you've got all the details of the story right there. But yes, Alexander the Great was thought by most experts to be bisexual. So that would make Muhammad and Alexander the Great both LGBTQ.
Oh yeah, fair play. He was definitely. But as with most of the Quran, you can just do a little bit of a deeper dive, and then Muslims get as confused themselves because it is part fable, it's part history, it's part stolen and fabricated from various different places that it really is hilarious trying to piece it together. I went on a rabbit hole trying to uncover the story of like the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon, and when I realized like, where are they getting this from? Anyway, that was Muslim me trying to understand it before realizing I was on a wild goose chase. Oh, David, I think this is your territory. Thank you for the super chat, the Al Zut Agency. I love this picture as well of Momo the Great. Some money for my desert boy, for my desert boys or from your desert boys, either way. Hi guys. Hi.
Hello.
Thank you. The Triggered Christian, thank you so much for your super chat. David, teach us the Islamic dilemma. I've seen you talk about this a lot, David, in passing. Do you want to comment on it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's a simple argument, but anyone can look up the Islamic dilemma. It's normally used by Christians, but anyone can use the argument. Anyone who, it doesn't matter what you believe about the sources and so on. But basically, the Quran affirms the inspiration and the preservation and the authority of the Torah and the Gospel still in the possession of Jews and Christians. Tons of Quran verses on this. But the Quran contradicts the Torah and the Gospel in the possession of Jews and Christians on basic fundamental doctrines. And so this leads to a dilemma. Either we have the inspired, preserved, authoritative word of God, or we don't. It's one or the other. If we have the inspired, preserved, authoritative word of God, Islam is false because it contradicts what we have on basic doctrines. If we don't have the inspired, preserved, authoritative word of God, Islam is still false because it affirms the inspiration and the preservation and the authority of the scriptures we have. So if we have the word of God, Islam is false. If we don't have the word of God, Islam is false. Either way, Islam is false. Therefore, Islam is false. Pretty simple argument.
What a beautiful conclusion. And there you have it, ladies and gents, the Islamic dilemma. If you want that in detail, David's channel, Apologetics Roadshow, I think you cover it, right, David, in more detail? Break it down for people to use. Huljantel, thank you again. No, it's the score of the Al Zut I emailed. Oh, fair play. Okay, you weren't talking about the footy. Okay, then, David, I want to check the email.
Yeah, you got to be careful. If you're talking about a score right in the middle of a World Cup, then, yeah, that would seem to be a soccer score.
Yeah, funnily enough, Al Zut is not on my mind as much as the World Cup. So I got confused there. But thank you. I'll check the score of that for sure. Hojinto, thank you again. Nuria, Google sometime this news from a while ago. A Pakistani drug dealer wasn't deported from the UK because he is his son's only only teacher of Islam. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. It's getting more and more pathetic by the day. I think I can list another handful of examples that are as dumb sounding as this. But sadly that they're true. For me, the chicken nuggets will always be like the king of examples. But this one makes complete sense as well. So maybe I'll do a compilation of some of the most pathetic reasons why judges have allowed terrorists, convicted nonces, and general nuisances to society to stay in this country for pathetic reasons like this.
Some sort of top 10 list would be good for that. The top 10 dumbest reasons people weren't deported.
Yeah, exactly.
By UK judges.
I think I might work on that. 1:30, right? Okay. Okay. Thank you so much, David. This has been it's been very, very insightful to have you kind of brainstorm with me and bring to light the Islamic doctrines. And I think this needs to, for people who know this religion pretty well, I think it's good for us to be able to connect the dots. Because if Rupert Lowe is able to go to this extent and publish this inquiry to move the pendulum that much closer to unveiling what was the actual reason behind it. This isn't just grooming in general. It's not just people being pedophiles. It's not just child exploitation. There is a very, very distinct methodology based on a religious, or what they call religious ideology. So thank you for unpacking that with me. Anything you'd like to say before we close?
Nope, just this would be a really, really good time for people to start learning what Islam teaches and start exposing it. At the end of the day, that is Islam's biggest weakness. It can't deal with criticism. So for everyone out there who's looking at the grooming gang report, you should be thinking a couple of things. You should be thinking, one, if this is how bad it is with 6.5% of the population, do we want, what would the future be like with that population doubled or tripled or quadrupled or something like that? Good luck dealing with the problem then. So that's one thing. And two, what do you do about it? Well, Islam has the most glaringly obvious false prophet ever. And there's a reason they scream for blasphemy laws and Islamophobia laws and moan and wail when people criticize Muhammad. It can't stand up to criticism. And Muhammad Hijab himself, this was like 5 or 6 years ago, did a poll, not in the Zut sense, but he did a poll asking Muslims who doubt Islam occasionally, said, when you doubt Islam, what is causing your doubts? By far, the biggest answer was moral problems with Muhammad. So you've got a roadmap on how to deal with the ideology as far as criticizing it. Yes, you need governments and so on, dealing with terrorist attacks and things like that, and court cases and criminals. You need governments for things like that, but the main task is for regular people to deal with the ideology. So learn some information, learn some of the problems with Islam, and start sharing that information wherever you go. And that's how you ultimately deal with Islam.
Exactly. Very well said. Educate yourselves, arm yourselves with knowledge. And also I just want to say as we wrap up, thank you very much. Thank you, Sunny Cooley, for the super sticker. I can't see it for some reason. It would have been cute to see what you sent, but thank you for that. I just want to say to all of the victim survivors, to all of the individual MPs, to all of the local councillors, to all of the whistleblowers, to people like Rupert Lowe, to insanely brave survivors like Sammy Woodhouse and Fiona Goddard, to all of you who have allowed us to get to this point where you've had to force the government's hand to do a national statutory inquiry. I really commend all of you, and I hope that finally some justice is served and we get the answers, and some semblance of peace is derived from this, because it is very much needed. So thank you to everybody that's got us to where we are as a society. But yeah, other than that, stay cool, everybody. If you're in the UK, very bloody hot. And David, thank you. Don't be a stranger to this channel. We'd love to see you again soon. And thank you so much for your time today.
Yep. Glad to be here.
Bye. Bye, everybody.